Now it's time for the public to raise any items not on the agenda or for future agenda items. Open time, any public here to speak?
Well, about your rate study, is that happening tonight?
Is there another, there's a separate agenda item on that? Yes. Okay, seeing no one here to speak generally, we'll move to the standing committee's report out, item number 7.
Oh,
Who would like to report out on finance?
First of all, I want to thank Laura for wonderful notes from our financial committee. I hope it helped the board members to see what we're doing. We're working hard. So I would hope it would also help you if you have any questions that you can kind of check in with us prior, or that's kind of how it's been flowing. Do you want to comment on legal? We are at 300 and how much, right? I can't remember.
nearing our budget.
Well, the budget for the year, I believe, is 360 something thousand. And is that right? And so we're our new budget started in July, so we're like midway, and we've already almost reached our cap on our legal fees. What else did we talk about here?
Well, I'm just going to pull the numbers up. We actually budgeted 500,000, and we're going to, and we're 8 months into it, and we're in the 400 something thousand range. So we're probably going to pass our budget. I don't think that there are other things that are above and below budget in our spreadsheet. So I don't think we need to do anything from a legal standpoint. We had a whole series of things that we discussed. We went through the finances page by page. We went through the checks that were written. There were a couple of questions about some of the checks and how much we're spending on certain things. We're fixing up and revitalizing part of our CCTV, so we have a backup if one of the parts of it go down. We reviewed the monthly legal costs, like Pam said, and this last month was the lowest we've had since we started recording, I think. It was 23,000, yeah. So our trend is clearly in the right direction for us as a district. And then we as the finance committee, we've been talking about, we've been tasked, I guess, to look at the policies and procedures that affect us financially. So the things like how money is spent and some of the things that came out of the audit that we had last year. And so we have a, I think it's ambitious, but reasonable. We have a list of financial policies and procedures that we have heretofore not adopted or even had as a district. And so we will as the finance committee, look at these and go through them and make suggestions, and then we'll bring them to the board, and then we can, we'll do what we do with all policies and procedures, and have a board discussion and see if they're helpful to the functioning of our board.
Are these like generally accepted accounting
Yeah, well,
procedures?
you want to do it?
Yeah.
What I said?
Well, just very high level. This is a very specific actions that we're taking. These are the policies that were identified from the last fiscal year audit as gaps, or either because we didn't have them at all, or that the ones we had they felt were in need of a substantial upgrade. Yeah. So there's a specific list of proposed revisions and new policies, and that's the batch that Peter's referring to. So we didn't just kind of pull it out of the sky. They are specifically targeting the needs that were identified from the audit.
The independent auditors.
Did you guys come up with who created this?
Staff created this for us, and that's why I say it's ambitious, because it's 4 or 5 months worth of work to get 6 policies written, which I think is a lot. Since we haven't done any in the last 2 years. So
as a board, so.
Yeah, this is what an independent auditor brought up.
Right.
But in the timeline, again, just, it's a little bit ambitious, as Peter noted, but the idea is that we want these addressed and ideally in place ahead of the start of the new fiscal year in July. So that's the target. It's not etched in stone if we don't quite make it, but that seemed like a logical scheduled basis for adopting it. So.
I want to point out too, on page 4 of 8, were you done with that?
Yeah, I think there was one other thing that we talked
Talk
about.
about the bonds.
Right, okay, you talked about that.
I don't have your notes, but the bond is at 4.9%. It's in the back.
It doesn't actually have the percentages in it.
I don't have my notes
It's in the packet.
here. Right.
It's attachment A in our finance committee area.
And just while she's looking, I mean, what that is that's the, it's a very brief report that we put together to address the comments last month in terms of how are we showing clear tracking and documentation of the use of the bond loans. So that's what that is all about.
And the minutes still come back each month? So, okay, great. That's great. And the board will sign one.
It's the last page of the packet.
Are we gonna discuss that attachment A now, or? I just have kind of a pretty basic comment about my feeling about special committees reviewing district business. And I see it as more as a filtering of the information prior to the full board receiving it. I'm concerned about that. If audit is something the whole board needs to be involved in. And to run it by the committee, and the committee makes a recommendation to the board, that's all we see is the committee's recommendation. I've been very concerned about the bond expenditures. I'm used to a city having a special bond committee, and they review all the expenditures. They make recommendations, and they see exactly where the dollars went. You know, this is a good first step, but it's not enough. Greg and I have had a few emails, some a little terse, maybe back and forth about the issue of the bond money and how it's being spent and how it's being related to the board. For instance, and look at the page attachment A. It talks about gravity sewer lines, Group A. We spent $1,400,000. Group B, $282,000. What I tried to do was add everything up to try to go over the 17.9 million. 17.9 million. And so it doesn't add up for me. It didn't add up for me last month, but it doesn't add up for me again this month. So, and I think once there's a more in-depth reporting that will become clear as to what we see is the payoff the installment loan was $84,000. That's correct. And the current building. So we want to know who carried the paper on the current building, who got that check, and who paid, who held the loan, and who got that $8 million. And when I added it all up, it didn't come up to 17.9 million. But I guess there's going to be further reporting on that.
Well, real quick, Frank, so it should be a complete overall accounting there, but I won't try to check the numbers in front of us tonight, but the intent is, let me just put it that way, and I'd be happy to sit down and go through this. The intent is that the numbers in attachment A, the back, that should be literally down to the dollar, an accounting of the net bond proceeds and exactly where everything's gone and then what the balance is. So there's a lot of information there, and we can, this is our first this is our first step in responding to your request, and I take it, I mean, staff takes it very seriously. We're open to ideas to how to expand on this or and continue to modify it. So this is our first cut, and absolutely, I mean, again, we can sit down and figure out what to add to this information-wise for the board. It's a lot of money. It's a big bond proceed, or bond sale, and basically, what we want is a reporting mechanism that works for the board. So we are totally open to suggestions.
So I just added, like in between, it says less, the cost of insurance, et cetera, et cetera. I just ran a tape on those numbers, and I came up with $1,285,556. And then on the 12/31/13 payoff of loan is $8,420,742, and this is net financial bond transactions. It drops a couple $100,000. So it's not making sense to me.
Okay.
That I don't know how where the 80207 comes from. And then when I add the bottom setup, when the report comes to $2,312,000, okay, it's within $2,000. And bond proceeds less capital projects. Does that mean we have $5 million, $5,897,000 unspent?
Yes, that's what.
That's still sitting in the bond fund someplace.
Well, it's sitting in our bank account, Frank. It's money sitting in primarily in our Bank of Marin account, essentially with an administrative tag on it from our end, so to speak. It says, these are only for the bond, the approved uses. But that's money, that's money we received from the bond sale that is sitting in our bank account right now, waiting to be allocated to capital costs.
So I should have been able to run that tape and end up coming up with a $5,897,000.
Yeah.
I could never get there with those numbers.
And my guess is, again, seeing this for the first time, some of the wording may not be clear, but what you're assuming this is supposed to do is what was intended to do. So
Sure.
Somewhere in there, we sit down, we can probably figure out where there's a misinterpretation of some of the numbers. And again, I want to emphasize, we can expand on this to whatever's helpful for the board. So,
Can you send questions to Greg before our next meeting? So we understand.
yeah, it's easier to sit down and go through it in person, Frank, by all means, let's do that.
Yeah, but see, again, it's a filter between staff and the full board.
Well, let me know how you guys want to handle that. I mean, we can talk about it. I didn't want to recreate all this for you guys this evening, but I'm more than happy to go through it.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to figure out how we got that figure of $5 million.
Okay.
And when I add all the columns and subtract, it doesn't come up.
Okay. I can kind of give you the high level, I don't have the calculator, but if you take the first summary number, the bond proceeds, the $17,913,665. And then, that is the bond proceeds.
Okay.
And if you subtract from that, let me rephrase that, the $8,207,000.
Okay, let me
368.
The bond proceeds of the net bond premium is added to the bond proceeds.
So start with the $17,913,665. That's what we got.
Sure.
Then the next series of numbers, up to and including the $8,420,742, that was essentially spent immediately, so to speak. It's what it went to all the cost of issuances and the two debt instrument payoffs. So when it was all done, after we paid transaction costs and the two debt instruments that we're paying off, we were left with the number, the $8,207,268.
Doesn't add up.
That's a little.
So when I add that column, 180, 89, 55, 25, 9, 34.
Yeah, that's what it's configured a little bit. It's maybe configured a little bit in a little bit confusing manner. If you take all those numbers up to the $8,420,000, take that and subtract it from the $17,913,000. what's left, what we then had to spend going forward on actual capital projects was the $8,207,368. Okay, so far so good. And so think of that, think of the $8,207,368. That's when the dust all settled, we paid off debts, and we paid off transaction costs. That's what we started spending on capital projects. So then if you subtract from that the $2,310,000 down below, which is what we've actually spent on capital projects so far, what's left again is still what's sitting in our bank account, so to speak, the $5,897,000. So I think the point of sort of the point of miscommunication on this thing is how that middle table is configured. So we can definitely fix that easily enough, because I totally see where you're coming from. When you look at that column of numbers, the typical interpretation is that the $8,207,000 ties out to that immediate column of numbers above it, and actually does not. So we can configure that a little bit differently.
And for the first five, it came to $1,285,556.
Okay?
And if you add off the pay off the loan,
The $8,420,000.
$8,420,000. Now we're talking $9,705,556.
Okay, so then if you subtract that total from $17,913,000.
Is that where the eight
Correct, that's where the $8,207,368 comes from.
comes from? Okay. Okay, and then you subtract those. Yes, it's not real clear.
It could be clearer, and that's what I said, let's keep working on it, because we can configure this better than it is more useful for you guys.
Yeah, to be clear, the top part was extensively discussed in August, September, October, when we did the bond funding. And it wasn't, the December payoff is one of the things that was not, we hadn't discussed very much. And then the bottom part is new. The bottom part is the tracking part, which is the new part.
Yeah, that's where the money's now being spent, is in the bottom half of that table. And those numbers will change each month or each quarter as we bring you the report. But the first thing we'll do is modify the format and take care of some of the stuff that you guys noted this evening.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Anything else on the finance committee report out?
Just to point out on the connection fees, we increased by 18.43%. So thank you, Frank, for getting this connection fees.
And are there other standing committees to report out? No. Okay.
So on the consent calendar, I had a question, just a question on the finances. Should I ask it now or wait for the consent?
Why don't we move on to
Yeah, let's go for the consent.
Okay, so that's the end of item number 7. Number 8, the consent calendar. Does anyone have anything they want to hold from the consent calendar? Or?
No, just for some clarification. This is page 2 of 6 in the sheets that show the expenditures that we made. And it's numbers 85, 86, 87, 88, 89. And so this is kind of corresponding with how the Central Marin Sanitation Agency sees our agency. They're still listing Larkspur separate and Ross Valley separate. And so I question over there why they're listed separate. And then I see here, we pay them separately. We pay CMSA the treatment charges, and then we pay CMSA for Larkspur's treatment charges. I guess the top figure there is Ross Valley. It says CMSA, but it must be Ross Valley Sanitary District. And the next one is Larkspur. Then you look debt service, CMSA, and then debt service Larkspur. So that kind of confirms what the CMSA is saying, like there's Larkspur still some kind of still a separate. But do they bill us that way, or do we break it out that way when we pay it?
They've insisted on billing us that way. When we've tried to get them to consolidate, they have resisted, and it just wasn't a big enough deal to really fight about. But I mean, there was nothing in our argument as to why it should be one that was really compelling to make that be an issue between the two agencies.
So
Oh, are you saying
just
so?
when I'm at CMSA, I'm questioning those numbers, and here I see it in black and white, but we're paying it that way.
Right, we've just gone ahead and gone with the way they bill us.
Mhm.
And that predates a lot of mergers and things like that.
Sure.
And remember that the debt service is EDU based, so that's what we use the debt agreement, whereas the other charges are for CMSA. So I think they probably have a legitimate argument saying these EDUs were defined as Larkspur, and they'll stay defined as Larkspur, and they were charged for the debt.
You know,
Does the math come out any different?
Oh.
And I think what I hear Frank saying is that because of the representation on the CMSA board, it reinforces that sort of.
I guess we write them a single check and let them figure it out.
Yeah, just one check.
Stacy, you do the math.
Without breaking it up.
That's interesting. Thank you.
That's all I'm looking
Okay, any other things to discuss on the consent calendar? All right, great.
I'd like to move,
Motion.
consent calendar.
at. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Consent calendar. Item number 9, adoption of the updated sewer system management plan. SSMP.
I'll do a real quick introduction to this and then hand it off. So what you have in front of you is the proposed adoption of the updated sanitary sewer management plan. And we actually brought this item previously, and it was essentially what you're doing by this considered motion is you're adopting the sanitary sewer management, or the sewer system management plan. So that is a required regulatory document. It is typically updated about every 5 years, but we were given a specific requirement to update ours as part of the 2013 cease and desist order, and to have that submitted by December of 2013. So we did that. We submitted it to the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the document that you've already seen. That's the fairly sizable one. We did that to meet the CDO requirement, but we made it clear that it had not yet been formally adopted by our board, and the regional board said that's fine. Just let us know it's final, so to speak. So we brought this in January, and we, I think, very quickly realized that that was a lot of information to expect the board to go through in a short amount of time, because it is an important document. And so we moved it out a month, and also with the idea that there would just be a brief high-level overview on the document and its purpose and scope for you this evening. And then basically the staff recommendation is for the board to adopt the updated SSMP following your discussion this evening, after which staff would basically just, in a sense, resubmit it to the regional board as final. And that would be the last formal step, and the technical requirement of the cease and desist order for this particular update will be complete. Again, we'll still be on that kind of unending cycle at the moment, which is every 5 years you update this document, which again is a good practice regardless. So with that, what I'm going to do is hand it over to Doug Humphreys. Doug Humphrey has been, kind of remains a key member on the overall infrastructure asset management plan effort. He worked quite a bit on the earlier phases of the IMP, and specifically on with our staff, along with Vivian Housen, on basically the nitty-gritty, the real detailed heavy lifting to update that document you have in front of you. So Doug's going to kind of walk you through at a high level what this document is about, and then we can open it up to questions.
Great. Thanks, Greg. So Greg's right. This is something that not only you have to do, but every collection system agency in the state is obligated to do this. The timing is different on yours, and you have to do it because of the CDO. But there have been some recent changes, and I'll talk about that. So in one sense, the timing is kind of fortuitous for you, because everyone's having to update theirs right now, every collection system agency. And just the basic general purpose, fairly straightforward. It's really just to promote effective management and operation of collection system assets that agencies own throughout the state. This was a real key issue and was the subject of many workshops and ongoing discussions back at a federal level back in the 90s. If you ever hear anyone talk about a CMOM system, essentially that's what this is, except the state of California took this. It's never been adopted federally. It was at the very end of Clinton's administration, like in the last 2 weeks he was there, and immediately got cut when administrations changed, and it's never gone anywhere at the federal level. So there may be some things that happen eventually there. But the state has taken it, and the state of California, it's an SSMP, Sewer System Management Plan, but essentially it's the same animal. There's 11 specific elements, as the state calls them, that have to be addressed in these plans. One of the key things, two really key things, are the operations plan, and as part of the operation plan is what they term the overflow emergency response plan. That's your SSO response, any response, not just SSOs, but it really, SSOs, of course, for the collection system are really the key thing. Greg mentioned that you're required to update this right now because of your CDO, but it's required every 5 years by every agency to be updated. Just a little bit of background with the state of California. This only was set forth as a regulation in 2005. Prior to that, the San Francisco Regional Board had a reporting system that was mandatory, a computer reporting system that was about 2 years, Pat probably remembers that. It was about 2 years prior to that. So the region was a little bit ahead of the state, even though there were some significant differences in their reporting system. But there was a reporting system that was implemented, an online reporting system. But then the state worked with a number of different agencies, including BACWA, who was very instrumental in it. I and a lot of other people worked really closely with people at the state board to set these regulations in. We didn't like a lot of things that were adopted, but we got the best thing we could. And so in 2006, the WDR, that you'll hear people in the industry talk about, that's really the regulations, and it's waste discharge requirements, and this order in 2006 that was adopted by the state board that sets forth the requirement. Part of that is also the reporting program that goes along with that, and that's the requirements for all the reporting and what you have to report for your SSOs anytime you have an overflow, the timing, the information, all the specific details. And of course, so they started gathering a lot of information in from everybody, but they really didn't know quite what to do with it. They didn't know quite what it was going to look like. So the state realized they wanted to change that because in looking at the information, there were some things that were some problems, frankly, with their system online. A lot of comments. They started user groups where a lot of people in the industry on the agency side were giving feedback and have been giving feedback to the state staff. And so in September of last year, there was an amendment made to the monitoring and reporting aspects of that. And that changes pretty radically how you report. I shouldn't say radically, but it changes. There's some very significant changes in what's reported and the timeline for certain things. Change the number of categories of SSOs. And I say fortuitous timing in one sense, because that was adopted and approved in September, that enabled you to wait for that time before it was actually final. And it fit in with your timing where you could go ahead and adopt all those changes in this new SSMP, and they all are in there. You didn't have to do it and then come back and change it again 6 months later, because that is now what's in effect, these recent changes. Just very briefly, I won't go through all these in detail. As I mentioned earlier, there's 11 different elements, as they call them. Everyone has to have this, and these have to be addressed in your SSMP. Goals, organization, legal authority, that involves everything in terms of connections, everything in terms of people using your system or connections into your system, what they put into the system. The real heart of it is the O&M program, which includes the emergency response plan. Design and performance standards, OERP, which again now is really part of the O&M program, a FOG program, something that addresses capacity, what you're doing with planning. And then the state really has put a focus on this too, the monitoring, measurement, and modifications. they want to see that you're looking at your data and doing things so there's a kind of continuous feedback and that you're conscious and aware of what your operations are and paying attention to that and modifying your programs as necessary to improve. There's a self-audit, we'll talk about that a little bit later too. There's an audit provision that you have to do, and then also outreach, public outreach or communications. And of course, really the primary goal for everyone is really to minimize SSOs and mitigate any effects that you have. That's pretty obvious. And assure accurate reporting, and that's a little bit trickier from the state's perspective, I think. They only have so many people that are much more aggressive in enforcement. They've hired enforcement people, they took a person that was involved in doing a lot of the setup of this, and he now has a staff, and he routinely, and know him very well, Jim Fisher, is going, and he has a very specific criteria. He looks at people's reporting to go out and do enforcement. Although there's a heightened awareness and attempt on the part of the state for enforcement, they still are fairly limited. You think there's over 1,000 agencies enrolled in the system statewide, and there's essentially 3 full-time people in this enforcement group. Now that said, in certain regions, they also will defer and let the regional board do enforcement. And in general, in San Francisco Bay region, it's the regional board staff doing it, not the state. The state does have the ability, if they want to, they can come into any agency and look at. So he's typically looking at both ends, and he's very open about this and tell you, he'll look at people that have the most relative amount of SSOs, and you're looking at it on a mileage basis, and then he also looks at people on the other end that are reporting that they don't have any. For 2 reasons. One, to look and say, is this real? But then also from his point of view, and he's been real out there with this, is that, well, if someone's really got 0 and they've got somewhat of a significant size, I want to see what they're doing because I want to see what I can gain out of this. So one thing, the board, ultimately, you're responsible, but they want to see this. In the organization part, the state wants to say who's responsible, and they like to see that in each one of these elements, who in your organization are you putting in charge? And it's not that they really come in and check that, but a little bit of this is they want to set that criteria and that bar because obviously if an agency is going to take it seriously, you need to have somebody in charge of making sure that all these things that you say you're going to do in your management plan are happening. Legal authority, a little bit of an editorial comment. You're in very good shape on that as well. Pretty solid, your ordinances, your code, you cover every essential element in here. And frankly, that's a comment I'll make throughout all of this. You're in very good shape with this plan. There are no holes that you have here at all. I've done 5 of these since September, since this latest MRP got put in by the state. And believe me, you're in very good shape, and even better shape after going through this latest revision.
Could you explain what an MRP is, please?
The MRP again, and I said that thank you. I mentioned, if we go back to one of the earlier slides, there were revisions done September last year. And it's the monitoring and reporting program. So what the state board did, some people objected to this. Rather than open up the entire WDR and go to the state board, because there had to be a public hearing and a much more formal process in terms of changing the original waste discharge requirements. State board looked at it and they wanted to change some of the reporting program. So what they did it at an administrative level rather than opening up and changing the WDR. So they looked at it, and their legal interpretation and their staff decision was that they were going ahead and they were going to make some changes to that reporting program, and they felt like they could do that and not open up the entire regulation for a public hearing. Now what they did, in fairness, what they did do though is they reached out, and it was about a year-long process. They had a number of workshops, and they still solicited comments from the discharger community and spent a lot of time on taking people's input. But some people still felt like that was a little bit of an end run, just to be honest. But that's where they changed the reporting criteria and the timelines and what has to be reported to them. And like I said, the really heart of it, these elements, the O&M program, of course, is most critical. That's really the heart of this. Everything else is important, but really fundamentally, what are you doing with your preventive maintenance? What are you doing to prevent overflows? What are you doing to keep your system up, and kind of standards do you have, and what do you do when you do have a problem? How do you respond to SSOs? And that's the OERP, the Emergency Response Plan. And this is something when they do, and we've looked at, I say we, Vivian as well, and a couple other people I work with, on these enforcement reports, and notices of violation that you'll see from both the regional board and the state, it's the same issues over and over and over and over again when they go and do just random inspections somewhere. When they go out and look at discharges, it's always the same things that they're looking for. And this is really where they center in on things. And they've gotten much wiser about how to do this. They understand from going around now and talking to people and listening to everyone. When they come in, if they come into Ross Valley saying they want to look and take a look at your operation and ask questions of people, and do you understand what your SSNP is? Do you understand the OERP? They're not going to go talk to John or Steve. They're going to go out and they're going to find the person that's out, the line worker that's out there on the truck doing that, and they want to know what they say. And you know, they're not altogether wrong in that, because you're always going to get, the supervisors are always going to know, and they're going to give the answer, yes, I know what it is, it's this. That doesn't happen in a lot of agencies when they go down to the line worker. You know, it's, we do this, we do that. You don't know what answer you're going to get. It's a little bit of a wild card. So it's not a bad idea, because that word is out, and so everyone knows that, okay, it really does emphasize training, and really that's what's important. Everyone does need to be trained on these procedures and know what's happening. You've been through this already. You've had this OERP was updated. I was present there. You had all your people have been there going through the response training. David Patzer works with CSRMA, helped on that with the emergency response plan. Everyone's been through it, and so a lot of emphasis has been placed on that.
Hey, Doug.
Yes.
In all seriousness, when it comes to this particular item right here,
Yes.
selection system, maintenance, knowing what an SSMP is, every element, that when they start doing that, I'll complain.
Well, yeah, I would agree with you, Pat. And I don't think they're not going to ask your line workers, I'm going to call it your field worker, hey, do you know about the goals from the SSMP? They're going to ask things more generally like,
They just keep it to O&M.
your agency has an SSMP, yeah. Have you been trained on your emergency response plan? And they'll ask the question, do they have records of that I can see? And then can you tell me who to go to so I can look at a record and see if that's true? So they're, you know, it's a fairly diligent audit. I haven't seen yet, Pat, where I think they've gone too far, to be honest. And I would agree with you, if they start doing that, I'm going to cry foul myself.
I have the staff to do that right now anyway. So.
That's excessive, and frankly, doesn't mean that much to me. That's not that important for certain people to understand all the different aspects of it. But I think the one good point is, I think particularly in the last couple of 3 years, what you've done, looking at your preventive maintenance, and when we're preparing this SSMP and updating it, you've got every component of everything that you could call industry standard, you have there. You're doing all of that. You've got rationale for your maintenance, frequency changes, for your video work, you're using condition assessment. I mean, it's that asset management aspect again. And I think you're very secure there. You're doing the right thing. Fog is a real issue in some places, really not so much somewhere else. If you don't have an issue, you can opt out of that element and say, we don't have an issue, and as long as you can prove to them why you don't have an issue. But in your case, it's you're using CMSA, we reference the contract. It's all very obvious in there. That's fine. They just want to know it's being taken care of. Capacity is a large issue, and here again, you've you've done quite a bit on that. You've got your whole capacity assurance plan where you're referencing your IMP and the GCAP. This is Vivian's note, her little pitch here, monitoring, successfully monitored using the CMMS program, InfoNet. It's important to keep things current. When they come in, they will check things just to make sure people are staying up to date with their programs. And then one thing, audits. There's a self-audit aspect of this. This doesn't have to, it doesn't go anywhere. It isn't turned into the state. But they want to know that people are analyzing themselves, they're looking at their data, they're looking at their systems and making a conscious effort to be critical of themselves and to change things as needed as time goes on. Things change over time. So they're due every 2 years, they have to be done. Again, Vivian's comment here is to put this in, apparently yours is due pretty much now. But she says it'll be a clean one. Well, it's pretty much a no-brainer. We just rewrote it. When you rewrite this, you're doing an audit in a sense anyway. We had to in this case. So the big thing they have here, though, there's a template that Bakwa designed years ago. It's a checklist to go through each one of the elements where you can do it. You don't have to do it with just in-house people. Some people hire people to do it, but some agencies do it internally. It's fine too, and just go through and say, are we doing this? You have to sit down and do a tabletop exercise and can do this fairly readily. The thing that the state really objects to on here, and the only thing I would caution you on, this Bakwa template is just a check the box thing, and I tell you, the state will not go, when they come in and inspect you and they look at that, they want to see a little bit of verbiage on there. And so on that template, we even added in on this template where there's 2 or 3 lines. You just need to put a couple of 3 sentences in there that explain, particularly if you're going to have any changes. In your case, in this one coming out, it's not much of a problem, but where they really have gotten upset with people is when they come in and people say, yes, we're going to change this, we're deficient here. Well, what are you doing? That you didn't really spend too much effort to explain what you're doing in a change here. You could at least write something in there. So I can tell you that the enforcement people from the state will want to see a couple of sentences at a minimum on the self-audit elements when you do that. SSNP will be posted on the website accessible to the public. That's actually, it's not a hard requirement that it's posted on the website, but you either have to post it on the website, which I imagine you had it on there before. If you don't do that, you have to send a hard copy to them. But in essence, part of this is for the public too, so the public can come in there and see it. So you need to do that, you need to make it public. The other thing, which is actually a requirement, is whatever action, if you take action to approve this tonight or any other time, you need to keep that evidence and you need to explain to them whether it's by resolution or whatever else. That's another requirement in the new provisions in the WDRs, that they can ask for that at any time, and they want you to provide evidence that your governing body has looked at it and approved it. In essence, what they're concerned about, and I guess what some agencies did, believe it or not, is they would go through it and staff would do it, and they never engaged the governing body. So that doesn't make a lot of sense, but so at least the state board felt like it was serious enough, or there was enough efficiency there on the part of some people that they were going to make a requirement out of that. A couple other things I'll mention real quickly in closing, and I'll just throw it up to questions. There were a couple of other things that changed in this latest provisions in September 2013, and they're all included in your draft management plan you have in front of you. You're required to keep a change log, which is just very simple. If as time goes along, if staff and the people that are responsible for these different elements think something's changed, and that the next time you want to change this SSNP, you don't have to go in and change it every month, every time you see something different, but you can just, essentially, you just write it and you keep a log. And you just noted at the time that we are going to change whatever. We're changing the way we're determining frequency of cleaning. And we're going to update our SSMP on this and have it documented. So when they come in again, they're going to ask for that. We want to see your change log. Are you keeping this up to date? We don't expect for you to publish a whole new document and go back to your governing board every 3 or 4 months, but if we don't come back for, we want to see what you've changed the last 2 or 3 years.
So if you've done capital improvements and now you don't have to put in line every 3 months, you can clean it every 24 months or something, they want to know why you did it.
Yeah, and really this would be more for kind of the policy sorts of things that are in here. Like we're changing, we're not having 3-month lines anymore, we think 4 months is fine. That's it. Just those sorts of things. So you make notes of that. Their categories are different. They've got 3 categories of SSOs now. It's not worth going into all the specifics. It's not a real big change from before because the category 2s are ones that are very rare. Over 1,000 gallons that don't make it to water. That can happen. I mean, that does happen, but there's not too many of those. But the timelines and the reporting requirements, the reporting fields are a little bit different. So any of your people that report online in the CWIC system are already aware of that. There's different fields for reporting that are in there. That's different. The one major change they had was that everyone has to have a water quality monitoring plan. It's not a real low bar, or I mean, it's not a real, I have to think about that. It's a low or a high bar. The requirement is that you have to sample if it's over 50,000 gallons SSO that goes into the water body. So doesn't mean that you don't have to sample, that you can't sample. If it's less than that, you may want to. It may be in your best interest too. But they wanted to see a formal, there's got to be a formal statement in there that you'll have a plan, you have sampling protocols, what you're going to sample for, and you go in and you look at that. And there was a little bit of debate about that because some people wanted different things to be included in that for sampling at the time that these new monitoring program requirements were being debated back last year. That's in there, and if you have, and I think you've got experience with this already, if you're have a SSO that's over 50,000 gallons, reaches water, you have to submit a technical report that has certain information in there as well. And so those are things that are all requirements now, not that you may have been doing all those things before, but it's just an absolute requirement, and since it's a requirement, it needs to be included in the plan as such. And so that's all in there, it's all updated. And so you're current in that sense. It's not like there was a deadline to implement all these monitoring changes. I mean, once the state adopted that and it was effective in September, it's effective. And it wasn't like they were going to go and force on people the next week, though. I mean, they even said they recognize people haven't had a chance, and people have to go through the governing boards to approve these plans. So it's not like they really said you have a grace period on this, but really it's kind of immaterial anyway. You're up to speed on it. You're there, and all those things are included. So with that, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer any other questions you may have.
I'm curious, if there's an easy way to explain how this interacts with the IAMP. I mean, actually about half of this is the IAMP attached. Would you say it's just, has a different regulatory structure? This is...
Yes. Yeah, this addresses the very specific requirements that the state calls for. Because the state says in these regulations, you will address these items. So, and you're right, you're already doing quite a bit of this as you've already had set forth and had down and approved in your IAMP. It was your practices that you were doing anyway. But just to keep the kind of standard format and one that the state likes to see with their elements, it's in essence, it's kind of restated in some way. Now, you did have an existing one before, too. You had an SSMP that you prepared and had in effect since 2006 when the original, or shortly after 2006, after the regulations were first passed.
It started in 2005, it was finalized in 2006 by RFC.
Right, yeah.
And we also came up with our sheet cap then too.
Right, for your capacity.
Board members, other questions? Just a quick one on the overflow emergency response plan.
Mhm.
It's sort of been talked about here off and on, our signage. Would that be part of it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because our signs are very tiny. And then Frank and I went out to a spill. And it was so tiny, I mean, if you really want it to be known, there's a spill, you want people to see it. And I don't think we replaced those, have we?
Nope.
And so it's been, like, do you have criteria and guidelines, how big the signs should be, how they should look?
I believe there are some general ones on sites and that. And again, that's something I don't do personally. David Patzer does that because that's really his.
The state doesn't have a sign size though, that
No.
they require for this, so
They
they're
do.
11 by 17, I mean, not 11 by 17.
We use it
Legal
in-
size,
That's,
laminated in prominent locations, bare minimum every 100 feet, but 50,000 gallon spill requires that you actually have them every 1,000 feet down current or downstream and every 500 feet up current. I believe that's what it is. But Steve probably knows it better than me.
We did, I mean, we've reviewed the signage overall, and so the short version is, all of that's been reviewed both with county, you know, with the more field level county health people and with the state. So we really hesitate to do anything, in a sense, beyond what they are saying is acceptable, because it's not exactly clear what it is we're acting on the basis of. So we're in a more clear regulatory, you know, role or relationship in a sense, if we are sticking with what a standard that's been well vetted and approved by, you know, all the existing regulatory folks. So as Pat kind of alluded to, I mean, there's certain minimum standards, and we just, on that particular detail, we have been reluctant to do anything different, simply because it's a little bit of a slippery slope. It's not quite clear what we do with that. So that's all.
and I do know part of David's training, and I sat in on that, is he goes through a series of slides where he's taking pictures from throughout the state and showing different incidents. And the other thing I would say, as well as what Greg's saying, and sometimes there's judgment in all of those situations too, depending on where you're at. Every situation is going to be different. So a little bit of it is they've got to get kind of a read in the field, because David has pictures of really nice signs. And the picture I'm thinking of in particular, there's some really nice signs that are out there, nice, large, very prominent. And right behind it, because it's set a little bit too close to the SSO, you see a person walking with their dog, and walking right through the puddle, because they didn't see the sign from the direction they're coming from. So, you know, some of this stuff you can cover, and a lot of it I do think it's just experience and training and going through it time and time again, talking about it, because it's you can cover a lot of it in your plan, but the best efforts still may not. You can't just codify everything and make sure this is going to be handled. So
It takes coverage too. I mean, if you have a major event, you know, it's really hard to replace a human situation where you need to control not only the traffic control, but the pedestrian traffic too, especially when there's an overflow. So it can be very challenging. And you may not be able to get the kind of coverage you need. Let's say you don't have enough staff, or the police department's on an emergency and you can't get them to help you. I mean, there's all sorts of scenarios. So
the location can be tough. I mean, depending on where you're at, and that goes for sampling as well. Even though there are those sampling requirements, and I know what's in David's, reflected in yours is one of the primary things is, I mean, generally you want to take those samples, 100 feet upstream and so much depth, but primarily you have to worry about worker safety first. You know, if you're by a creek, well, if it's safe. Because there are situations, and when we do get rain where, you know, you've got some situations where it can be a little bit difficult for the workers, so you want to make sure that.
and when you have contact with your local health department, they have certain jurisdiction regarding sampling.
That's right.
In many regards. You know, it's a communication between those agencies and your agency too. In many cases, I know Marin County has, if you bring them up to speed on your situation, like, let's say you've got a flooded creek, and, you know, it's completely inundated with water and it's unsafe. You know, if you let them know your condition or the setting, first they're gonna say, well, let's see what it looks like tomorrow, maybe, when the tide's out, or whatever, and they'll understand.
And that varies, luckily you're just in Wayne County, but that varies widely, but you're
I'm sure
absolutely
it
right.
does.
Whatever the health department, local health department, what the county health department, it changes radically, believe me, from one county to the next, how engaged they are.
Right. Thank you, Doug.
Early on, when I first came on the board, we had some spill issues, some large spills, and the signs were posted. And the board kind of looked at the signs and said, unless you're right up there in front of it, you can't tell what that sign is. And so we even had a subcommittee meet on signage, and we talked about increasing the sign size. 8.5 by 11, we're talking about at least going 11 by 17, and having visible, something red on there that jumps out, so people go, well, what is that? But it just never happened. And the spill we had recently in San Salvador went by, and we're still using that same dinky little sign that most people don't even know what it is. You kind of walk right up to it and read it closely to understand there's a spill. So I think we do have to change our signs. Because we had a committee that agreed, talked about it. We probably were going to get a change, but somehow it never happened. And on the issue of samples, now, the county closed the county lab, and I appeared at that Board of Supervisors meeting, and representing only myself as one board member, but I objected to them closing the lab, saying, we're going to have to take our samples to Fairfield, but they closed the lab anyway. Do we have to take our samples to Fairfield now, or we go to the consolidated lab?
Well, we'll let,
CalTest.
Yeah.
It's a great place for Novato and several other districts to take their samples to.
Where is it?
Novato, they have one, or is it Napa?
CalTest collects up samples and has them analyzed for folks. They do it for a lot of the local
And
agencies.
the nice thing is if you have a need for it in the middle of the morning or on the weekend, they can handle that, they will do that.
They pick up at
They're a contractor, basically. And they do batches for folks, so in the county, like, I don't know how many times a week, but why?
Because that's an issue for, on weekends, because a lot of even the
Okay, so
local
we just-
agencies, sometimes they're not.
We just have to drive to Nevada, we don't have to drive to
Well,
Fairfield.
they'll come pick up, I think.
Yes.
They come pick it up for
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
Page 4-6 of the document talks about rehabilitation replacement plan. And the one thing that I experienced in testifying at the Regional Water Quality Control Board the last time we were before them is they really didn't know how much we've done as an agency.
No matter how much information we give them.
So here we are, I'm saying, on 4-3, rehabilitation and replacement plan. Over the last several years, between 2007 2013, we replaced a lot of pipe. I'm thinking we ought to actually list the projects, list the miles, and list the cost, the dollar amount that we spent, so that it's clear that this district has been paying attention. They were almost acting like, it's like you guys don't care over there. And we put a lot of money, I mean, you guys do, I was just coming on the board.
They ignored it.
What they care about is the overflows.
Well, I understand, but here I'm just reading rehabilitation and replacement plan, seeing if we had a paragraph that listed out the projects, the dollars we spent.
Actually, I agree with that,
That's all.
I don't think
That's
it's
all.
gonna change anybody's.
No.
It's a good standard. So are you saying actually make room for it in the SSMP and update it on a regular basis?
No, I'm writing this document right here.
In the SSMP.
Oh, is this, okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of like change too, or a log in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, you could add that.
Spread it out.
You could still put things like that.
It wouldn't hurt.
And then over on page 413 was just a list of dollars. Pipe length, total cost, et cetera. You get down to the bottom, it's $57,108,000. And then total cost. Is that projected 5-year expenditure?
That's out of the IAMP from October.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the latest table we had, so that should be current.
Okay.
Table 8.2 out of the IAMP.
On a notification, we kind of went a little overboard because of that big spill. We had complaints from some of our cities, and so we said we're going to expand the notification over and above whatever the law requires. We're going to notify the city manager or the mayor of the communities if we're above them. And I noticed now that we're discontinue requirement. Oh, no, not now. Reduce the number of entities that must be notified for SSOs greater than 1,000 gallons.
Right.
Are we reducing a number that we had set to kind of inform the community? I mean, have we changed?
Well, the state reduced it because they used to require you to call OES.
Okay.
And now they've changed that. You don't call them for every time it hits a wall. You call them if it's over that, because they didn't really want to get it. It was in reaction, frankly, to what happened at SASM. It has nothing to do with SSOs on their issue going back a few years ago.
They were able to manage it properly.
So what the state did, the state in this latest set, they reduced that. It really is just OES.
So this has nothing to do with this district's reporting. If we're going to notify Larkspur because of a spill happened in Kentfield,
You can notify that.
that
Yeah.
doesn't change. Okay.
And the one thing I would tell you, one of the reasons it's not in here though, and this is true, and I've seen this in a number of NOVs to other agencies, don't put anything in here that,
Go back to bite you.
yeah, don't put something in here that you're not required to do. Generally, I mean, if you're always doing it, okay, put it in there, but if you put it in there, you better do it. I worked with one city who said, well, we're gonna notify Fish and Game every time we put something in a creek. Fish kill or not, okay, that's great, nice to be altruistic, but guess what happened when they got a notice of violation? You had 5 incidents, you did not call up Fish and Game. And they said, well, we aren't required to. Well, no, you're not required to, but you said in the time you were gonna do it.
Did you always do it?
So, you know, no good deed goes unpunished, so don't offer yourself up to do things if you don't have to. It's my advice.
But we can have policies that are more extensive than what's written.
Absolutely.
Which is
You
what
can
we
do,
This is what we
absolutely.
do.
You can
As long as you can walk the walk?
Sure. One of the fourth dot down, the fourth bullet, is discontinued requirement for reporting SSOs for private sewer laterals. Were we actually reporting the private sewer laterals to the state?
Yes, we were.
We were.
Yeah, it's not, and it's option, it's always, from the state's point of view, it's always been optional. It is still optional.
But tell them really why the state's so optional about it.
Well, the state really wants.
I know, but they also know they don't have the authority
Well,
to
they can't,
enforce it.
yeah, I mean, you don't own it, so how can you?
So the next question is then, private sewer lateral spills that were taking place here,
Yes.
were counted, when the state had all these numbers against us,
Well,
were those private sewer lateral reportings included?
no, not,
None of them.
I don't believe so. They truly did, and a lot of people have a concern about this, but they did keep a separate database for those. If in your questionnaire you answer the question properly and say that you don't own the sewer, why not? But I mean, every agency has to fill out a questionnaire once a year. And it's your background information, and that's one of the key issues on there. Because there are a number of agencies that own the lower lateral, and so they are obligated to report those, and those numbers do show up on theirs. No matter how small the SSO is. If it's an SSO, it counts.
Right, the state requests that if you don't own the sewer lateral, that you can elect to report that information.
That's right.
Voluntarily.
You can, and you can. That's up to the agency's prerogative. They can do it if they want. And that's just a policy
So we
decision.
won't be reporting private sewer lateral spills anymore. Is that correct?
No, we're not required.
Well,
That's my understanding.
we were in the past.
No, we didn't do it too long. We didn't do it ever in the past. I mean, until recently.
Probably long enough to get us in trouble.
A lot of the feeling, a lot of the reason that a lot of agencies will not do it, and it's not two reasons. One, they're afraid it's gonna get tagged to them and the numbers look worse. That's one concern. The other one is, and I think there's even more validity to this, is that there are a fair amount of people in the state that would like to see agencies own laterals. And they'd like to see it required. And so the more data that they get that shows that this is a big problem, the more likely a lot of people feel like it leads down that path. And why they're reluctant to report them, because they realize there are a lot more overflows from laterals than there are from their main lines. And they have a concern that the way the argument goes is, well, if my electric line, my water line, my gas line comes up and the utility owns that. So, you mean I own my sewer lateral? I don't own anything else out in the street. Why do I own the sewer lateral?
Those
So-
are privately held companies, and this is a public agency, but
Yeah.
Doug, the issue, the way I see it is it has everything to do with legal authority.
It does.
So when you
Ownership.
can't say that you own that private lateral, the legal authority, they're gonna be looking at your legal authority, how much energy you have, or legal authority, to actually enforce that someone fix a problem on private property. And believe me, health departments won't get behind this, not anymore, because they've been sued for interfering. Public agencies, whether they're cities or districts, if they don't have the language that's been adopted through resolution, they don't have the authority to truly enforce this, to require property owners to fix their lines, and that's why these private laterals are all in such awful shape.
Enforcement's
Yeah.
very difficult.
On item number 8, on the first page of the report, the cover page of the 2-page report. It's a system evaluation of capacity assurance plan. So I went to that section, and it really doesn't address capacity issues. So I'm trying to determine whether or not we're able to handle all the new hookups that are going to be coming our way for an agency. You know, cities and counties have to have their general plan updated, housing elements updated every 5 years. And we have to do it every 5 years also. So then I'm wondering about our capacity. For instance, right now there's a potential in Marksburg of 920 new units coming online. And we've just been advised in Fairfax that next Wednesday night they're going to approve 355 new units being built in Fairfax, potential. And I don't see this dealing with any potential new hookups. Should we be addressing the potential for capacity?
Well, I think it references your capacity model. I think, I'm guessing as a routine practice, I shouldn't just let Greg answer. I imagine you take any activity like that, you run it through your model to ensure whether you have capacity.
Well, right now, as far as I know, the short answer is, since we did the 2006 SheCap work, the original SheCap model, that was the last really extensive evaluation of system capacity, Frank, for both dry weather and wet weather flows. Now, in the course of doing the IAMP, we updated the hydraulics model for some very limited specific purposes of looking at already identified or past identified capacity issues. But it was at what I would call a very macro level, like peak flow in that pipe. The 2006 evaluation said it was kind of an issue. We were looking at in 2013, which we were doing with the hydraulics model, was it still an issue? We were just looking at that individual pipe. We weren't addressing that question in the context that you are, which is, I think what you're alluding to, or at least somewhere along the lines, there's other types of planning documents look at specific documented growth projections and say, oh, like water supply is the classic one. You have to go out and sort of show through some process that you have that quote capacity. Now, so the short answer, Frank, is, as far as I know, at least going back to last, I think it's safe to say back to 2006 and beyond, I don't know that there's been discrete specific activities that said, here's all the new hookups projected for our service area and what does that look like. Now, one of the reasons we may not have done that, I don't know, this is sort of speculative, is that the impact of the number of new hookups is, you know, that, I mean, primarily it's gonna show up in the base driveway flow, you know, where, in other words, simply because the influence of the INI is
All
so
bets are
many
off.
times greater than the base flow. So in other words, the influence of any, let's say, a couple hundred new homes over time.
How
throughout our
about a couple
system,
thousand? Is there an issue with that with us?
We haven't answered that question, I think is the short answer. This
Should
district
should
hasn't.
we address it in this capacity?
Well, I'm not sure you can address it there right
Okay.
now based on what,
So-
so that's something that maybe is
So all this,
something you need to be looking at.
everything predates Plan Bay area, prior development areas, and transit-oriented development. So I read the Fairfax plan at 3:30 this morning. And it says, we contacted the Ross Valley Sanitary District, and they have capacity available to hook up 355 new units in Fairfax.
Did they provide any documentation?
No, just that word, and then they mentioned they have assurance from MMWD also, that they have ability to service the water, so.
Assurance, is that what they said?
Huh?
They said assurance?
Assurance, I get the exact language, I was reading it in the middle of the night. But that kind of jumped out at me, I went, gee, who did they talk to at Ross Valley to find out that we have the capacity to handle another?
We should do that during a heavy rain to confirm that.
So I'm, you know,
So I think the only, what I would call the closest thing that I'm aware of, frankly, to that sort of a check is like when we get, for example, when this subdivision's going behind us, you've got there's a CEQA process for that specific development. And as you're aware, we're coming up on that process for the stationary plan, is a great example, actually. So the stationary plan, let's just use that, because again, I think it's a good current example. That's, I think, what you're alluding to in the 990 future housing units. Okay, so that's a perfect example. Right now, there's a municipal planning exercise going on, or a process, I should say, for that, the stationary plan. And the CEQA is in process right now. So, as I understand it, we should be getting requests for information and input by the lead CEQA agency as to certain basic municipal services. So my understanding is that in the course of completing that CEQA document, they're required to check with MMWD on water, the local wastewater utility on wastewater, and we haven't had those inquiries yet, to the best of my
I
understanding.
think you might have gotten it from Fairfax, because.
Yeah, so the best mechanism we have for that right now is the CEQA process. And others, I mean, if anyone's aware, I have not seen anything in the last year or so. But that would be our formal opportunity to say, for example, just hypothetically, are we confident we can say with a high degree of certainty that, yes, the addition of 900 housing units can be accommodated with the existing sewer system capacity, or not, and what is the basis for our making that conclusion? Right now, I think that that's something we need to do when those come to us, but in regards to the Fairfax one, I've never, for what it's worth, I've never heard of it, but the Larkspur.
I didn't hear it until last week.
Well, so that's something we'll follow up on.
And I live there.
Yeah, and I've been sort of anticipating the CEQA inquiries on the stationary plan. We haven't received them to the best of my knowledge.
Does Vivian's model allow for theoretical increases?
It's very high level. It's really not suited to the kind of influence you
Future
see from.
development,
Yeah.
So how do we measure that?
You'd want to take it, it's really situational specific. So
But seriously, I mean, if we don't have the monitors in the ground right now, we're gonna talk about that later on.
right.
We don't have the ability to monitor our system. How do we know we can take in another 1 million gallons a day?
Well, one thing I've seen other agencies do too, when a developer comes in and say, I want to add 300, I've seen other agencies put it back on them too and say, well, you need to do an analysis by a registered engineer to show me, here's the lines that would come into. This is to benefit you, here's our line. Basically, if you look at dry weather flow and do that, and you tell us what your development, what kind of flows it's going to generate, because you don't know what they're putting in. And they're going to tell you, and you can require. I've seen some people do this.
We figured out
They have
we
their
charge for
registered
it.
engineer.
Well, we
So
charge for the
presumably-
meter, but Frank's point, if we put 1,000 houses in and we can start getting spills in Fairfax or between Fairfax and here, and it's because of the increased
Yeah.
flow, then who's gonna, I mean, it's not the housing owners in Fairfax that are gonna be talking about that with the IJ, it's gonna be the board.
Yeah, you need to route it through.
But
When
also
you add
what-
flows in, you need to,
But the inflow and infiltration point is that the new hookups are gonna be good, presumably.
Presumably, yeah.
And it's just gonna be the volume of flush.
We
It's
hope.
the old
But
hookups
that still hasn't
that
added
we're
up
getting
that.
all the brackish water in the pipes.
As we-
And that's, I mean, really.
That's a great theory. I love that. I love that theory.
I'm sticking with it.
I'll stick with it.
When you don't have any more, Frank, or?
No, that's,
Well, so Frank, I will, for the full board, actually, let me just throw this out. Actually, this came up totally different context, but it may have been many months back on, this, I'm guessing, the best I can remember, it was probably related to the stationary plant. And also all the press, as you guys are aware, locally on the discussions going on about the possibilities of future high-density housing in our service area, plus other areas of central Marin. That did jump out at me as kind of a question mark. What formal work has been done to, it's a very simple,
Guarantee
straightforward
capacity.
question. And if you were talking about any other utility, you'd be asking the same basic question, which is, if I have a long-term growth plan that has specific projections of housing units or whatever metric you're concerned with, at what point are you taking that information and doing what I call a sort of comprehensive analysis to say, okay, here's the ballpark projection, the 20 year, whatever you want to call it, and you're working with whatever analytic tools you do have, whatever planning tools you do have, to say, it's our due diligence to say, okay, there's 1,000 extra housing units or new housing units over the next, I'm just making up numbers here, 20 years. And if people are asking us in an official capacity, what is your ability to accommodate this new demand on your system? Which again, is a very straightforward, reasonable question. Right now, I think this district is unclear as to how we answer that question and whether or not we even intended to answer it as part of any of these regional planning efforts. So I think it's something that needs further discussion in the future. I do want to flag it because I think it's a very timely topic. We haven't really had a chance to really think about it, but as you all know, the community dialogue has been going on all around us for at least the past couple of years. And I think the thing that's probably really bringing into focus right now is we do have a very active, real planning process happening in our service area that does have numbers out there in the public that say, and I'm not sure the exact numbers, I think it's roughly 900 housing units. So if we're being asked in our as the responsible utility, for what is the answer to that for CEQA purposes or otherwise, I think we need to spend some time over the next couple of months asking ourselves, what is that process, what are we going to be doing? Because right now, my sense is it's not something we're prepared to answer. Let me be clear. These are not unusual questions. These are standard, long-term utility development type questions. We just, I think right now they haven't been on our radar. So
I'll get that specific wording on the Fairfax.
okay,
We should have it in-house somewhere if they've got hold of
I
us,
think
right?
it would have been through the city.
it's all new to me. I've never heard, but it's,
I'll do a cut and paste from
Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public on this item, or SSMP? All right, I'll bring it back to the board.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the updated SSMP. Did we agree to any particular changes to this document? I want to just recap if we did.
We're trying to.
the table.
I read the table
Capital
on,
projects.
in 4.3 about the rehab projects between 2007 and 13.
With the recommendation from Director Ager regarding a tabulation of the capital projects that we accomplished.
Projects, miles,
Monetary costs, that's
and the cost, the dollar amount spent by the agency.
Okay.
with those changes,
Is that?
how are we doing over there?
All capacity issues, huh?
I heard, this is your
capacity assurance.
Motion to adopt the updated SMP with a recommendation from Director Ager on project we've accomplished, miles, and costs.
I would say let's leave it there, because if we start saying we're going to figure out how to handle our next capacity, we might be invoking this, where we have to be
Well,
careful for.
I think what you need to have in here is what you're doing now. You don't have to solve every problem and say that you're gonna do it right here. It's,
But
we
we
need-
are
we need
working
to
on
put it-
capacity assurance planning right now in a lot of ways.
you are.
Yeah, so, okay.
Okay, second.
All right, so I have a motion, Wasco Sullivan, all those,
So there's no way we can get some wording about capacity, that we're gonna do an analysis of capacity?
Well, I think Frank, what his advice is, and I strongly agree with it, is that we can do that under a different direction from the board in the near future. I think what we're being cautioned against is tying it to this regulatory document, and I
Right.
would agree with that.
If you put that in there, you've
Then they're gonna wanna
just
see it.
set another requirement for yourself.
We're doing exactly what he told us to be careful of.
But let's, to be clear, staff will bring you back separately some specific recommendations for what the district will be doing, or should be doing in the near future to address those items.
I'm satisfied with that too.
all right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Yes. Move back to order and move on to item number 10, discussion and direction on board standing committee meeting schedules and options for second regular board meeting. Greg?
Okay, I'll just introduce this real briefly and hand it back to the board. So we were going to discuss this last month, and it just got postponed just because we ran out of time. But, so really all this is we wanted to bring this back to the board for direction. As you're aware, we really have two active standing committees right now. Well, let me back up. There's two issues that really we'd like to get direction and clarity from the board on. One is the standing committees, and the second is the what we'll call the need for the second board meeting per month. And so the standing committees right now, there's two active standing committees. There's Finance Committee, which was restarted in a sense, I would say in earnest back in early 2013, and has been meeting regularly since then. It was done with the idea of recognition that we had quite a bit of financial related business coming our way, and having the committee more active would be beneficial in making sure we get timely and regular board input, and there's good vetting and discussion of materials before we get to the board. And then subsequently, later in 2013, after we were in the process of bringing on outside professional HR services, the idea was that was a pretty significant change for the district. We knew that we were going to be having a pretty significant ramp-up effort to really roll out and implement the new HR services, and by extension, that there'd be a lot of, it was expected to be quite a bit of, activity on policy updates and so forth related to HR type issues, and therefore an HR standing committee would be helpful to the same basic function of the finance committee. So that was all done. The HR committee got off to a little bit of a delayed start just because of the timing issues, and basically the concern that was expressed was what role the committees were playing in relative to having those discussions compared to the full board discussions. It's kind of what was alluded to earlier this evening, really, is a good example. And then separately, just to be clear, the district has had, at least in the last 1 to 2 years, sort of we had a very formal approach on the second board meeting, which said that it'll be available and it'll be anticipated, and if it's decided it will be needed, then it'll be posted and an agenda will be posted and so forth. After sometime in mid to late 2013, I don't remember exactly when, we did sort of drift away from that a little bit. We hadn't utilized the second meeting in quite a while, and at a minimum, I know that we basically stopped posting or mentioning the second meeting every single month. And that was sometime, again, I want to say late 13. So we really want to get clarity on both of those. Number one, does the board want to continue to have those two committees? And really we need, well, just that, the two committees. What would we like to do if different on the second board meeting? So the staff recommendation is pretty straightforward. I'll just say as general manager, those committees, I find, like we find that the committee role is quite useful. It does help us get that input we're looking for and bring things probably a little bit further along by the time they get to the board. And then, so the staff recommendation on the committee is very clear. We're recommending that they continue. And if they're not, we'd like to ask some direction as to how we can sort of meet that same need. And then secondly, just to maybe clarify the second board meeting issue, our recommendation is to just kind of recommit or go back to that practice we had, which was always formally expect and make sure, for example, this room is if we can get it, that it's reserved. We have a calendar date out there, and we just make a decision at the first regular board meeting, in a sense, on case by case basis. Do we need that second meeting? And if we do, get direction, and we have that lead time to go ahead and formally post for it. So it's really a return, is how I understand it. It would basically be a kind of a formal return to what we were doing in the latter part of 2012 and into roughly mid-2013. So that's what's before you tonight, and we just want to get direction. And with that, I will hand back to the board.
Well, board members? Just to recap a little bit on being on the finance committee, I think it's my second year. I think the history when I first came on the board was the finance committee sort of was there for when the budget showed up. And I don't think they met like we're meeting now. I sort of agree with Frank to some extent that we are covering a lot of ground, and I'm sometimes wondering, should some of those items probably just come to the board and not the subcommittee first? Because I have some concern about us reviewing them, and then, I mean, not that it's bad, it just creates a dependency to some extent to kind of look to what our recommendations are. Sometimes Peter and I agree, sometimes we don't really vote. But lately, I know the audit had some recommendations, and the meeting we had on Monday, we were now reviewing inventory, an inventory schedule. And I think it's great, but I don't sure that we need to meet every single month, is what I'm saying. I mean, Greg, what do you think?
Well, first of all, definitely the level of business, in a sense, varies.
I mean, it's true, like
the
the
example,
bonds,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was the example I can use. So obviously, when we're in the run-up to budget adoption, when we're in a significant financial process like a bond issuance, what have you. So the volume of business that goes up and down, and right now is a good example. You could say you're dealing with some non-monetary issues. You're dealing with these policies and so forth. So I would say that I really would defer to you guys on that. If you feel that, for example, on the finance committee, we're at a lull and a meeting every other month or what have you would suffice, not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were out of there by 5:30. I mean, we started at quarter after. So that could have been on the consent calendar and actually save the district some money for not meeting. I mean, I'm not trying
Well, we
to
probably
say I
could have
don't.
spent the hour discussing it here at the board, and instead we spent 15 minutes. So, I mean, it depends whether you take Frank's approach as it's a filtering, or I consider it a service to the board when we review this stuff and pick out the stuff that we think is important, whether we agree on it or not, and bring it to the board.
Yeah, like, why take away from the product that we all end up inevitably looking at
anyway. All it is if two members of the board are on a standing committee, they might have a take on something that can't be vetted.
Oh, yeah, we do that all the time.
Yeah.
And a lot of things are cleared up or.
Without the
Yeah.
full consensus of the board anyway, it's just an opinion.
I don't need
I don't
any,
mind
I don't need
meeting.
any meetings.
I don't mind,
personally.
what?
I don't need any meetings
Oh.
personally.
Yeah, you've got a lot of meetings. So I mean, I'm happy, I really like the finance committee. That's why I've been on other committees, but I'm just wondering if it narrows down and we're just reviewing monthlies, you don't need a committee to do that.
I completely agree,
If you've
Kevin.
got a lot of things
It's meant to be
happening.
pragmatic, it's meant to
Okay.
be what works for you guys.
Right.
That's it.
So what other people
I spoke quite a bit about it earlier, my thoughts about it. So I have a fiduciary responsibility to the voters, and so that's why I'm constantly reviewing all the financial issues. And so to have those finances filtered by a committee, and then I'm going to receive what they think I should receive, is not how I see my job. And I'd like to see us do it as a committee of the whole. We're already paying 4 board members to attend those meetings, 2 and 2. And if we did it as a committee of the whole, it would be 1 more board member. And it just makes sense for me to do it that way.
I don't know, I'm torn because I certainly think that it is typically best practices of a board to have subcommittees that hash things out in more detail. And rather than a filter, I see it as a helpful screen and a way for folks to hone in on an area of interest to them or to drill down on the details, and then make the full meetings more efficient. And I'm particularly opposed to a second regular meeting every month. I think particularly the burden on staff of coming up with those board packets. I mean, if we're talking about full meetings like every other week, I don't think our work should justify that if everything is running smoothly. So,
Well, can we kind of stay on the finance?
Sure. But I think that they're related because if the subcommittees are high functioning and then presenting information to the board, it's less likely that we need a second.
Yeah, I'm not willing to stay here to do 6 hours, because by 10 o'clock, it's just you're so tired and exhausted. I do it, but it's not a good way to govern, and for me personally, I don't function very well after 5 hours or 5-6 hours. So I don't think we have had hardly any meetings, extra meetings. Before you were on the board, we had them, I think every month we had an extra meeting, just about. We had a lot of special meetings. So my fear is that we're cramming everything to move it along, and some items, there's no public really late at night, because we're still debating on something. So I don't like to just say absolutely not, because I think that it's, at times, I don't want the agenda sort of narrowed down to where we're just kind of rushing through to get everything done because we don't know something.
I think it takes something off our game, frankly, when we're all a bit vulnerable late at night. We all know what you're talking about here on that one.
Yeah.
I think we make mistakes late at night.
Yeah, and I mean, I do have to get up early, but that's okay. But it's just, I don't know if it's a good way to serve the community to and most, even Fairfax has, do 2 meetings a month, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah, so, I looks like looking back on, because I've been on the board almost 4 years, where we've been with 1 meeting and 2 meetings, I just want to make sure that we're not rushing through, and we're not just, to make sure we only have 1 meeting, we're going to rush through and stay really late. Even our closed sessions now are going over, because we spent an hour in a closed session. So, and we did have to have a special meetings, because we did not have enough time. And there's been some talk are concerned about how much we can put on the agenda. If we're gonna have one meeting a month, we're gonna be putting things off. So that's my on the second meeting. I'm not stuck on having a second meeting every month, but if it makes us flow better as a board and we're covering what needs to come up, then,
So I guess the way I see the subcommittee and the second meeting related is that if we do away with the subcommittees and then we're having a committee of the whole, that is our second meeting. Because we're basically pushing the work of the subcommittee, finance particularly, but human resources has not been active as I understand it. We're pushing the work of potentially the work of the finance committee back to the board. Now, the counter argument would be, we're already dredging it all through anyway, so.
Yeah, we may not be serving the purpose if we redo everything.
So I'm torn, but I know that it is best practice of boards to have subcommittees of the board that dig into stuff in more detail and present it to the full board. Not in any sense to make decisions for the board, but again, based on individual board member interests or just focus.
Do we ever get any public people at these committee meetings? Do you get public?
We don't get them at the board meeting, for the most part.
no.
Non-issues, right?
Public comment?
Well, if we discuss a rate increase at the subcommittee, we will probably get some trouble.
Couple, and then when the main event occurs, then probably a lot.
Well,
Yeah.
so one quick, I think everyone's aware of this, but obviously, so you've seen how the finance committee, for example, has been functioning. There are no, I think it's accurate to say, there are no decisions made, and there are no formal votes taken. They're largely discussions, and maybe if it's helpful, I mean, you're sort of separating out what you might call more routine business, like the monthly financial, reviewing those, from something that might rise to a different level, like new policies, like we just talked about earlier this evening. And maybe it's helpful to differentiate between those and set a little bit of clarity as to, well, I think to the concern of what is the role of the committees, clarifying that they're vetting and addressing what you all have agreed to are appropriate, what I'll call sort of standard business items, and then other specific assignments that you're given as a board. So in other words, as a board, you've said, we want the finance committee to vet these things with these considerations in mind, and you're expecting that role. So that, I guess what I'm saying is that maybe if there's a little bit more month-to-month direction as to what folks are looking for from the committee, that might help clarify what the role and expectation is of the committee. Again, the best example I can think of, you'd say, okay, on the finance committee, we realize you guys are going to look at these policies, great, but we still want to have a full board discussion on them. Make sure we want to make sure you really dug into the following items or concerns, something like that. But the main point is there a way to refine your collective direction and expectations in a sense to the committees that lets them find that balance to where they're helping streamline the business, the basic business, but they're not at risk of seen as filtering or what have you. So just a suggestion, one way to approach it.
If I remember correctly, Greg, I think it was when you came on board, it was kind of your plan to help review more and vet things more before it became the board. But
Yeah.
what I always thought prior, the history, is that finance committee was only for a short period of time. It was an ad hoc then, but it was a short period of time, and that was it.
Yeah. And I was just drawing off of my past experience,
Yeah.
Pam, where I was, used to having those monthly meetings. And it was, obviously the roles and so on were a little more clarified, but that I was just drawing from my recent experience, so.
Finance committee was ad hoc when I first started, and I believe it was Frank wanted them because they had brought up the fact that they were meeting regularly and was converted to a standing meeting, and I think that happened quite a while ago, at least over a year or more ago.
Something like that. We had several meetings for budget, sequential meetings for budget, so we got the budget done prior to the fact that we had a standing committee, and then when we formed the standing committee, it was, I think it was more than about a year ago.
Yeah.
And we've been meeting pretty much every month since then. Sometimes meaty months, and other times not as. And we've canceled a couple, right, Ken? We've had one or two where we just canceled because there wasn't anything to do.
Yeah, maybe one. I guess we're not clear on the goals.
Well, but wait a minute, you all are clear on your financial standing committee meetings. I think what we had proposed was an HR committee, standing committee. So what I'm still trying to get my arms around is, you know, and I appreciate the updates, by the way, in the board packet, because I do get a good feeling of what's going on. Is what role we're going to play in understanding what's going on in HR and what information we can bring back to the board that will be useful. What I'm a little afraid of, frankly, Frank, is the concern over filtering of information, only because I don't see how that's possible, but I kind of wonder where that's coming from. Only because if we're going to propose something and HR says some sort of change or a policy that needs to be looked at, how could we possibly filter it before it comes to the board for maybe possible adoption or future adoption, when all we're trying to do is come up with something that aids in the HR requirement? I would rather, I'd actually rather have it come to the full board when I hear that sort of thing, instead of it being kind of predicated on the shoulders of two people. Because it just didn't make me feel too good hearing that.
Well, I think Frank is saying that the filtering may be taking place with the perspective of the finance committee. I mean,
Right,
it just
but
came out of the.
We only met
But with
once.
the same energy, it's the same thing, isn't it? So, I mean, as far as HR, right?
We only met once.
No, we only haven't been able to get back to it.
Understand.
I really don't care where we do it, as long as we do it. Because I think it takes board interaction before we actually vote on something.
Well, our agendas are staff-driven, though, so, it's not like, I don't feel that, I think the finance committee's loose we meet and we go over all the finances, but it's not clear, are we supposed to be going over just the monthly or everything, just like I thought it was.
See, I'm really happy with the work you all are doing, just to let you know, Pam. I've seen you
Yeah, we're
learn a lot
detail
about the
freaks.
finances and budget, and you ask a bunch of good questions, and Peter usually knows the answers to all of them already, but
But I want to know, do
wanna see
people
that at the HR
really
level.
go through the finances? Because I don't, do you guys really, I don't, but do you guys check the finances very?
I look at it and I realize that our manager is giving us good information, and our people that we employ to give us the information on behalf of what we're requesting. I feel that it's accurate and good. And then, I listen to the auditors, and then I listen to the CalPERS recommendations, and I see that we're addressing it. From a board level, I'm feeling pretty good about that. Interaction with HR right now is limited, except from the great reports I'm getting.
There were times in the past when only one committee member showed up. The committee met. Not recently.
This happened to us once. On finance once.
So anyway, how we're going to use our time more effectively without overburdening staff, and if we don't do a second meeting or a standing committee meeting, then we're going to spend the time at the board level one night a month.
But don't they come to your committee meeting?
Yeah.
It's kind of a wash. I mean, finance, who shows up at finance?
But it may not be necessarily a
No,
6 or 8
no,
hour
me and
meeting.
Julie. But I have to say, this is the first detailed minutes I've seen since I've been here.
Yeah, I've never seen.
I've never seen any, but action, we met. You know, like 2 or 3 lines. This is the first detailed narrative finance.
Who took the minutes?
There's been some.
You took it from the tape, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
The tape.
okay, so there's a cost there, so we're not really saving any money, but.
Detail.
Okay. Well, as long as you end up with a quality product, that's all I care about.
So you can see what this meeting, these minutes, this meeting was probably a couple of hours. Most often we meet for 2 hours. Did you say, Peter?
Not that long, no.
No, maybe,
An hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half.
yeah, so,
So I think that this, yeah, that's a good example of what I sort of understand to be the intended value of the standing committee in that particular role is we're sitting there with 2 representatives of the board, and we're spending an hour to 90 minutes really drilling into these narrow topics. And then you two are able to bring back your much more focused review and input to the full board. And obviously, I think generally speaking, to expect the full board to take 90 minutes to talk about monthly, the batch of activities that were financial related would be not practical. So that, again, that's been my past experience, that what you are doing, and this is of course entirely up to you, is you are designating those 2 people, and you are tasking them with that responsibility and saying, you are going to go drill into this. I've asked you, you've been delegated to do that, and you're going to come back and report. So yeah, there's a question of clarity of purpose and trust, or whatever you want to call it, that's the role that's being served. If that's not the case, then the benefits that I'm suggesting exist with the standing committee approach don't exist. So that's kind of a question for the board to ask itself. That's fairly straightforward.
All right, at the risk of moving us along, I'll ask the public if they want to have any comment about our standing committee structure. And then bring it back. I'm inclined to keep the standing committees and to then reassess their roles and what their charge should be from the board. I'm not inclined to be a committee of the whole, but I'm just one person.
I'm willing, I mean, nobody likes more meetings, but we're going to have another meeting one way or the other. We're going to do it as a second meeting at each month of the board and spend 90 minutes doing the finances, or Pam and I are going to do the finances with Julie, and we can go over the numbers. I serve on other boards and we have subcommittees, and it works fine with in the other structure. But I wouldn't want to force my views on anyone else.
Do you think this is working? I mean, you believe that the finance committee is
I think this, we're providing a service and a time saving to the board and everybody else by doing what we're doing.
but there's sometimes I don't think we need to meet once in a while. I don't want to be doing inventory policies, to be straight up. That should be the HR.
Well, we can bring that back to the whole board.
Yeah.
I like to read them and make sure that they make sense in English.
Well, we had some good talks, recommendations on it, but, anyway, I guess, maybe what we can do at the next finance committee is talk about focus and what our goals are. 'Cause I don't think we ever had that discussion, really.
And what is the sense about the HR subcommittee, which I'm not.
Right now, I've got an orientation, that was nice.
Great.
What's HR think?
I think it would be really valuable to have the HR subcommittee meeting, particularly this year, because I heard you talking earlier about the policies that are coming to the Finance Committee at the recommendation of your auditor. Multiply that by 5 and stretch it twice as long, and that's what we're going to be doing in HR in policy project only this year. I just gave Greg a 12-month work plan, and one of the really, really big projects is an administrative policy review project. And when we had our first meeting and you had your orientation, we had talked about some of the roles and responsibilities that we thought a subcommittee for HR should achieve, and policy review was one of those, consistent with, and I don't know if you've discussed this as a board, and maybe that's the first thing you need to do, what is your approach as a board to the organization of Ross Valley? Not the service in the community, but how do you want the people in Ross Valley to be treated that work there? And when we've established that, the subcommittee is extremely valuable in looking at all of our policies to see if they're consistent with that approach. And I think that's pretty important, because that approach will also have some resources behind it and a whole lot of things that you're responsible for.
So we might be able to help convey that to our board members in a complete setting like this, after we've kind of vetted it on behalf of the board in a form review.
Absolutely.
And then staff. What staff want the HR function from the board regarding policy and all that? I mean, would it be helpful for us to be involved in?
Well, yeah, I guess our recommendation, right, generally to speak more specifically to HR, we proposed the standing committee simply from the following. The district was making a significant change and a significant financial commitment to bring in professional HR services to the district. It was a whole new thing for us as an organization. And we knew that a lot was going to happen in the first 6 to 7 months of that push. That was our expectation, because there was going to be a lot of cleanup, a lot of evaluation of needs and assessment. And as Sophia just alluded to, it was expected that the outcome of this would be a lot of suggested updates, changes, and so on. And so we were looking for, it's kind of like talking about there being a major financial push. Therefore, we're going to have the finance committee meeting ready to work with that. It's very clear that there's a major new set of information coming that's very important to us as an organization. How do we want to handle that? That's all it was about. That's all it was ever about. So if we think that there's a better way to handle that, that's really it. I come back to it comes back to your view as a board of how you want to use subcommittees. And if it makes sense to you that we pick 2 people, we task them, and we expect them to be responsible for this, and bring us back a full, unfiltered view and recommendations, and we're entrusting them with that role, great. If that's not how you want to do business, there's no obligation to do business that way. And I want to be clear, I don't want to make this sound more, critical. If it's the board decision to not have that committee, we'll find a way to bring the major HR decisions and updates to you. And that will happen. So this is just meant to be a constructive step. I mean, I can say that when we went into the big push on financials, it was helpful to have the finance committee helping keep that dialogue moving, screening stuff. And that's really what all we were trying to do with the HR committee. It was intended to have about a 6-month trial run, and with the idea that an awful lot would happen in that first 6 months of the committee meetings. And after that, if it wasn't needed anymore, at your guys' decision, then we would stop meeting. Yeah, we're not looking for work. We're not looking for extra meetings.
We did the same thing with the consolidation feasibility study.
So I'll be clear, we would find it helpful. There's a lot of good work being done. There's a lot of
I keep seeing Wendy's head go like this.
There's a lot of important decisions coming, and those decisions will get to the board, because they will require board votes and board action. To be clear, the committee will not be making those decisions, but we will be providing initial screening, input, advice.
Right. It's a way to provide policy input at the development level, and that's what the board is charged with, is policy.
Well, I see it as kind of a good blend also, because what I've noticed is your contractor, who's our HR personnel right now, is always at our meetings, and she's So what's this thing gonna say? And I have a feeling she's dedicated to what she's
Is that a
doing
hell
for
lot
us.
to go?
And that really helps create balance when it comes to presenting that information to the board. And I'd like to at least have that opportunity as, I think the district deserves it. So anyway, that's my input.
Oh, yes, Wendy, I'm sorry. Acknowledge your name.
I can't speak to the HR committee because it hasn't met, I'm not sure of the process, but I can speak to the process of the finance committee as a staff member who's been involved. And from my perspective, it's been very helpful, and not so much for the review of the regular business items like the financials, but for review and discussion of the bigger changing business items to receive input from the two board members on the committee of ways to make what we're presenting better or to fill it out. So going to the, say, screening or filtering, I have found it to be less of a filter and screening and more of a way to actually make it bigger, to actually provide more information or better information. So the feedback from the committee as a staff member, I have found very important on things like policy and some of the other, the bond and that information. So that when it does come to the board, it's more complete when we start talking to you about it in this setting.
Well, also, to piggyback on that, sometimes we ask questions that help the staff. When they show up at the board meeting, they can be more prepared if
Yes.
something would come up.
I would agree.
So there's some of that, it's not necessarily making a decision. And sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't, so it's.
Well, it's never making a decision.
No.
Other than we agree to present it.
Yeah. Just for an example, on the finance committee on Monday, the auditors come through to use inventory because we don't have an inventory system. And I asked the question, did staff consider HR to overview it? And not that it was anything bad, but because we're so busy trying to get this timeline and the schedule for the whole year, they said no. So it's just stuff like that. It's just, adding or
That is a good
adding or
example.
subtracting,
Because we've
basically.
already been able to act on that.
Yeah.
And we've now, already within 2 days of that request, we've already got Sophia and Annie plugged into that draft policy discussion because of your comments and feedback at the committee meeting, which I was myself included, I hadn't thought about that, it's while we were in finance. And, but your guys' comments about, well, here's how this could affect staff, why not get some input? So that's just a good example.
So then it gives you extra vetting.
All right, well, I'm hearing, I think, a consensus.
I think we should probably try for another 4 months. That would be about the right time period.
What's happening in 4 months, Peter? To continue with the subcommittees, I guess I would ask Frank, if we do continue with the subcommittee, are you interested in serving on the HR subcommittee, or is part of it
Yeah, I don't like being a committee of one.
that you're not interested in serving on the HR subcommittee?
I'm not real interested in serving on HR committee. For instance, I read the report here, and it said continued collaboration with the Alliant broker regarding current employee benefits. Is there some issue with employee benefits?
That's a good example, again, that's a, actually, I don't want to mix that up. Do you want to?
I would be happy to address that. There is an issue with employee benefits. You spend a lot of money on them, and we really need to wrap our arms around what exactly are you paying for, and can we get comparable or better benefits for less money? That's what we're working with the broker on.
Who's Alliant?
Alliant is a broker firm here in California. They do a lot of business with public agencies, and they...
Did we hire them, or did you hire them?
Greg, I think you signed a letter making them a broker. Brokers, you don't really write a contract with them because they're commissioned through the insurance deals that are made, so it's not like we pay them directly. And, you know, sometimes people object to the idea of a commissioned insurance broker, but they have a lot more access to getting good prices than I do, and I think it's worth paying their commission if they can drop our benefits costs and still give good benefits to our employees.
Alliant is also the firm that works under the CSRMA umbrella to give us all of our other liability insurance. So we already work with them on insurances.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was, so let me just follow that. Like, I wasn't aware of the additional value role, so to speak, that Alliant could play for us. And within, I don't know, I think the first month or two of Annie and Sophia being on board, Annie brought this to my attention and said, boy, you already have these guys under contract, so to speak. Have you asked them to perform this extra service for you? It really comes at no extra cost, and here's all the things they can go do for you. So we said, great, let's go do it. It was literally signing a very simple piece of paper. There's no financial commitments. And that was a whole aspect of Alliant that I simply wasn't aware of. I never would have taken that action. So maybe I'm mixing things up. Number one, that was the advantage of having these guys on board, that they have that specialized knowledge. And anyway, not to digress, that's what Alliant is all about. That's a good question.
So are the HR consultants handling all the hiring now? Are they screening?
They're directly involved, Frank, in every step of it, yes, setting everything.
So we were doing it before.
Staff was doing
We
it?
notices in the paper, or whatever we did, and took the applications, and do we do background checks, or do they do the background investigation?
Everything is coordinated at least with HR, that the tasks themselves can get divvied up. In other words, we may have a standard process for initiating like a DMV check and so forth, but they're involved basically now in every single step, from authorizing the recruitment, making sure that the job spec is posted properly, setting up, making sure that the interview panels are properly set up. Basically, the short answer is they're involved in every step of the recruitment and hiring process now.
Now, our contract with employees expires
Next
June
year.
30th, 2015.
Correct.
Will they be involved in any of that?
It's a ways out there, but we would expect, there's no question that the district is going to want to have the best quality outside expertise on that whole process that we can get. And right now, that there's certainly an anticipated role for our human resources, yeah.
So I sit on a couple of other boards, and they've got consultants on board. CMSA has a consultant on board.
Yeah.
Mosquito District has a consultant on board. They're reviewing contracts, costs,
Yeah.
The new Affordable Care Act. If you have 50 employees or more, you have to do certain things, provide insurance to employees, etc.
So just real briefly, Frank, when I saw that item on the CMSA agenda a month or two back, and I became aware of that relationship, I forwarded it to Sophia. Her comment to me basically was, correct me if I'm mixing this up, basically, yeah, there's no question that when we get ready to go to that formal negotiations, we're going to want to have that type of a resource to assist us. So to be clear, that may be something in addition to RGS, but I guess my main point in mentioning it was when I brought that up to her, she was like, that was no surprise to Sophia. She said, well, of course you're going to want that. That's how you want to approach these things. So yeah, I think a lot of what you just listed, those all go to a lot of the reasons why I think the district took this step, which was the world of HR, the world of labor relations, the world of regulations is too complicated for us to be able to beat. So I think we're all past that. I mean, the value of having the services, I think, is very clear. I don't want to get us diverted. What's the role of that dialogue that occurs via the standing committees, I think is still what I guess we're asking for direction on.
All right.
So, if someone else wants to sit on the HR committee, these reports are great. I don't need to go to a committee meeting to read that report and come back to this board and say.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to serve on the HR subcommittee. I'm an employment law background.
Perfect.
In terms of developing the policies that I know we're going to need to develop and having input on that, I would like that. Okay.
No, I'm seconding Mary's nomination.
It's trading out a tender facility.
See, I don't need help with that, Craig.
All right, do we have a motion on that, or just?
You typically.
We did, we voted
already
to
voted.
appoint the committee, so we have to vote to appoint.
I think I volunteered, and Mary said she would act as the alternate.
We horse traded, I think, a little bit.
There was a little more credit.
Did I? Okay. Do you
Well,
want me to
one thing
just?
you could do is you could just give direction and then bring it back on consent the next time that it's been, because just make sure
It
it
shows up. on the-
shows up and
Okay.
it shows and it's on consent, so the two positions.
Now, Frank, you're gonna have to do something else, because you can't keep up with the other four.
Does that mean that we'll have a meeting in
Yes.
March?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so
Have we ever decided on the?
HR subcommittee member, we will continue with the finance committee for at least the
postpone.
next 4 months while we have
My
the
services.
distinguished Peter Sullivan.
Yes, so keep it 4 months. And,
For at least.
okay.
And,
Oh, so we're gonna have the 2 meetings for the next one?
We're gonna,
No.
we're gonna list them, right?
List them.
That was all we're gonna.
okay, is that all right with you?
That's what we do now.
Yeah, well, no, we're not
We,
doing
let me be
consistently.
clear. We had sort of informally stopped. I don't really have a good reason. I think at some point we weren't using them. If this is your direction, we will go back to the practice we had in late 12 and early 13 of having that second meeting ready to go. And you'll have, basically at the end of the first meeting or sometime during the first meeting, you'll have that opportunity to say, yep, we need it, let's have it, or not. So that it'll be available and readily flexible for you to have it.
Quite often with the manager and the president of the board working out the agenda, you can kind of tell if something's going to be really lengthy on an agenda
Yeah.
and you're not going to cover it in one night.
Absolutely.
Plus, I would like to possibly incorporate guest speakers, educational things for the community, which
Yeah.
will
We were gonna
Coming
have
up
one
with
this
zero
evening.
waste,
Yeah, right.
because if we're jamming, we're not gonna have time for that, and it really has not happened.
Well, and that might be a nice use of a second meeting, like, for example, this month, we had a second meeting almost solely for the legal counsel review. And that, it handles my concern about having staff having to prepare for 2 whole separate meetings and agendas, if the second meeting is truly for some other special.
That's a great point. I think if you're selective in a sense, about what you assign to that second meeting, that makes life, certainly I'll just say, much easier for us, because, for example, if it's a lot of primarily informational items and so forth, then that obviously requires, that's a bit more straightforward for us. So, okay.
All right, thank you.
So
There's
your
no action.
recommendation, there's no action?
No, it's just direction.
We'll bring back a consent calendar item for the approval of the switch out in the membership to the committee, and otherwise we'll follow the direction on the second board meeting.
Yeah, because those positions will be reviewed
Right.
again in the July or whenever you guys rotate.
Right, so we'll have a
Better document that, yeah.
All right, thank you. Item number 11, progress update on
Mary,
waste.
can I have a request? Aren't these all the items off before 14, are they all? Is anybody here for items 13, 12? I'm trying to move up.
They're here.
Okay, thanks. Okay, item number 11, progress update on wastewater utility service rate study.
Yeah, so I'll introduce this real quick, and then I'm going to hand it over for a brief presentation. So the board is aware, we initiated the updated rate study back at the beginning of the year, or actually back in December. John Farmhouse, HFH, has been actively working on this. And one of the key activities involved in that just got completed, which was we had a series of 2 similar public workshops to focus primarily on the question or the issue of rate structure alternatives and the considerations of those rate structure options. The 2 meetings were, we thought, relatively well advertised for what it's worth, but the long and short of it is we had pretty light public turnout. We did get some fairly, I thought, some pretty decent local media coverage on the first one. They pretty much captured most of that meeting, and I thought that was very helpful in terms of raising public awareness ahead of the second meeting, which was actually last Wednesday evening in this same room. We didn't get the level that we were hoping for, but we did have some very helpful discussions with the people that did show up. I think we had about 6 or 7 people here last week. So we're at a point where we are seeking direction this evening, or the main thing we want to focus on is what we've concluded in terms of that first basic policy question for the board, which is the rate structure alternatives that we have in front of us. We have gotten to the point in the analysis and in the technical work that we are bringing forth a specific recommendation out of the range of alternatives, and we're going to explain the reasoning behind that recommendation this evening. We're also going to get into the first look that has been available at some specific numbers coming out of the rate study work. And again, the primary objective of tonight's discussion is to get direction on the rate structure alternative question. And then we'll be coming back to you in March with really what I'll call essentially the final draft recommendation, a full-blown set of details on the recommended rate changes and so forth. So John Farnkoff because of the shift in the meetings, he had another very important meeting with another district that had long been scheduled that's actually at a 218 vote, so he's there. We have Rick here this evening to go through the information. Now, Rick and the other staff person, I'm sorry, Seema and John. Obviously, this is our core technical team. So Rick is completely up to date and well informed on the work. It was a change in the last few days to not have John here. That's the only reason I mentioned it. So I'm going to hand it over to Rick. He's going to walk you through this presentation, and then we'll answer any questions.
We don't have any handouts.
Oh, hold on. I just meant to hand these out as I was talking. Please take one and hand them down. It's a copy of what Rick is going to go through.
I'll wait till those get handed out.
Yeah, that's right. Pat did a term. He was here as a public member.
And by the way, I thought you did a terrific job, you and John.
Is Pat here?
Yeah.
You were at the meeting.
And guess what? No charge to the district. No charge to the district.
That's nice.
That is good.
All right, I'll just quickly get started now that you have your copies of the slides in front of you. There's 7 or 8 slides I'd just like to cover. As Greg said, I'm Rick Simonson with HF&H Consultants, and we do have a consulting team on the project. I think you're most familiar with John Farnkoff, and probably when I first stood up here, you thought I regressed in age. I'm Rick Simonson, a partner with HF&H. Along with Seema and John, we have been working on the rates with staff. So I'll just quickly go through some of the rate alternatives. As you know, there's a multitude way of setting your rates, and how you structure those rates do depend on your specifics within your community. Should go to the next slide. So working from left to right on this scale here, I've placed your existing rate structure on the left-hand side there. You basically have 2 types of customers or structures, either a fixed structure or a variable structure. And currently your commercial customers are on that variable rate structure. And as a whole, your residential, your multifamily and single family are a fixed amount per year. And now as you move to the right, far right, you see if everyone was at a variable rate component, single family, multifamily, and commercial. What we're focusing on is we want to acknowledge the difference in the average water usage per dwelling unit in that fixed charge for single family that's not covering single family and multifamily. We do know there's a difference in usage and how much is being expended into the sewer system and treated. So we'd like to take a look at what that differential could be. What is the rate impact of doing such a differential on that fixed fee? Now I have a couple of slides to help kind of illustrate why we're recommending the second option, where we just leave the commercial customers with the current rate structure, but splitting out the multifamily and single family. First, one of the key rate-making objectives is revenue stability. So understanding that you need a certain revenue to run the operations, and how you can count on that revenue coming to pay for those operations. So revenue stability is key, and flow, because your commercial customers are dependent on the flow, that revenue does fluctuate, it is volatile. So right now, just in where the district is currently, and looking at bonds, and the bond purchasers looking at rate stability. Can they count on the revenues coming in to pay them back on these bonds? So we think top priority is revenue stability. So currently, as I mentioned, you have this variable structure for your commercial customers. That makes up 11% of your revenue. So some of it is volatile, it's dependent on flow. But the majority is based on this fixed charge to your single-family and multifamily residents, which comprises about 89% of your revenues coming in. So if we were to move exclusively to a flow base, we'd be, the 89% portion would now become more volatile, and you may not receive the revenues you anticipate. And just to illustrate that, we looked over the last 5 years of the flow in the residential customers, and how that does fluctuate from year to year. So you can see the predictability of your revenues would be more susceptible if you're going to apply such a rate structure to that 89%. Just in what I've seen over the last 5 years, 1 year in 2010 decreasing by 5.2%, and then decreasing another 7.6%. And people are conserving these water usages in the treatment plant facilities are going down, but then you see a spike up 17%. So they're somewhat unpredictable. So we're not looking to have that 89% somewhat fixed revenue really at jeopardy over the next few years. It's something that I think you're setting yourself up nicely for going forward with some of the reserve policies you've set forth. But at this point, we're looking at just recognizing that difference between the single family and multifamily and doing a rate structure around that differential. And then some more specific rate-making objectives. Revenue stability in and of itself is not the only objective. We are also looking at ratepayer equity, who's paying what and for what services, and also the ability to implement or to administer this. So this is just a quick little graphic giving some high-level ratings to what we think each of these structures will provide the district. So again, working from left to right, your existing structure, the revenue stability, it really is there because, as I said, 89% is pretty fixed and not susceptible to the volatility of the flows. The ratepayer equity, it's not real specific. It's treating single family same as multifamily, one dwelling over another. It's not real equitable necessarily within specifically those two groups. And then also the ability to implement and to administer this. It takes a little bit of effort. We've given it about 3 stars. There's a bit of effort on the commercial side to gather the information in order to do the direct bills on your commercial customers based on their flow throughout the year. And then as you move to the right, I think the trend here is the revenue stability starts to decline, the implementation administration starts to decline as you're moving to these more variable rate structures, and you're having to gather more information in order to do that. But the ratepayer equity starts to climb, and that is what we're working towards. But currently, just taking this all into consideration where you currently are, we're recommending what we're calling this flat rate differential. So the flat rate being charged your residential customers having a differential between what you charge single family versus what you charge multifamily. Understanding that the multifamily, on average, is generating less flow than your current single family. Currently, they're being treated equal.
Would you look at a monthly billing for a situation like that?
No, is keeping with the winter flow, because as you go monthly and summer months irrigation, it starts to really distort the flow that's actually going into the sewer by using the water flows during the summer. So we'd be sticking with the same period that's currently used for that.
So a one-bedroom apartment uses 88% of a four-bedroom house, basically?
It's not necessarily 88% of the flow, it's something less than that, but there are fixed costs associated with just providing the service. And so it's the variability of just those variable costs that come into play. It's about what we've seen in the district, and we're reviewing 5 years' worth of information from MMWD just to hone in on an exact number, it's around 70 to 75%. But the rate factor, we're taking into consideration some fixed costs, so we're estimating about 88%.
And what did Los Colinas get in their study?
Something close to that.
About 0.8.
Yeah.
80%.
It's a pretty consistent ratio you seem to find.
Okay, so moving on, so that's the rate structure, but before you make any commitments to a specific rate structure, there are a couple items that I want to bring up, and updating the EDU definition, so the equivalent dwelling unit. Non-residential EDUs are currently derived using a formula based on strength and flow. So first, there's a strength factor. A is the commercial industrial customer average strength, which is about equal to residential strength. Or is it high strength, typically your restaurants, the fats, oils, and greases. And then secondarily, the actual flow that's measured, that's being discharged. That ratio is currently 250 gallons. The assumption is equivalent to a dwelling unit of 250 gallons per day. The strength factors, the two categories, average and high strength, are consistent with what we're seeing in other agencies. That's not out of line. It's in line with state guidelines. Yes.
When you said equivalent dwelling units and 250 gallons, is that predicated on 2.5 people per dwelling?
It's,
No, it's calculated.
It's just currently what's in place when the rates were first established for the commercial. So that's the number that we're looking at and scrutinizing and suggesting a refinement of that.
That's a lot.
That's correct.
Is that overestimated?
Well, and this is what we're suggesting. It's a bit outdated with the conservation that's been happening. It's something we think in the ballpark of about 215 gallons per day.
I bet it's less than ours, the way that the conservation is going on.
And that can occur, even further as people conserve. But our estimate currently, based on dry weather flow, 4.8 million gallons per day divided by the actual number of EDUs currently in the system gets us to that 215. So that's what we've modeled and going forward, and we'll be refining these numbers as we get more information. So we're looking at reducing that 250, and you'll see on the next slide when we get there is that has repercussions to rates, specifically to commercial ratepayers.
Where does the 215 figure come from? What's the data you pulled together to have that number?
The 4.8 million gallons per day is the average dry weather flow.
Okay.
Divided by the years.
And that's recent?
Yes.
and I'm sorry, did you ask about the 250 or the 215?
215.
Thank you, okay.
So, yeah.
If I may, Pam, also on that figure, the average use per household, if you base it on MMWD water, is slightly lower than that.
That's what I was.
But we're constantly sending I&I in, so our ratepayers have to pay for the cost of treating and conveying and all of the stuff we do with their sewage of the I&I.
Yeah, CMSA is charging for everything they treat, basically.
So this carries an I&I factor in it as far as distributing it amongst the.
Thank you for that. 'Cause
That's a
that
great point.
now I can see the picture. That's good.
So as I mentioned, there are some repercussions. So this slide is intended just to give you an idea of the impact, potential rate impacts. If nothing else was changed except for this calculation, what would that look like? So the first row there is the non-residential EDUs. You're currently with the 250 gallons per day and that conversion factor. The district currently has 3,366 EDUs in the non-residential, the commercial and industrial. If we switch this 215 gallons per day, that increases about 14% or 471 EDUs, which would raise the commercial EDUs to 3,837.
You go down in gallons and the cost goes up?
No, it's not that, well, there will be costs, but so your number of equivalent dwelling units will go up because it's assumed a lower per gallon per day per EDU. So therefore,
Restaurants using the same amount of water, it's just being charged more because the EDUs are calculated as higher.
Because of the strength factor.
No, because of the EDU.
because we assume 250 to 215.
Yeah.
So by reducing the assumed gallons per day, that will increase the number of EDUs for non-residential commercial customers.
Well, supposing the restaurant's using 10,000 gallons a day, and in the 250, it has 40 EDUs. And if you say an EDU is only 215, it's going to go up to 52 or 53 EDUs. And it's still going to use the 10,000 gallons a day. It's just going to be calculated as a higher, more EDUs.
It's a
Denominator.
different denominator, yeah.
Yeah, correct. Will increase the number of EDUs that you will be charged as a commercial customer.
Yeah, I guess, I remember my example all the time.
So we currently have one EDU, and now it's a 14% increase. You're going to have 1.14 EDUs. Because you take one divided by the 250. So that will increase the number of EDUs charged to the commercial customer base. So the non-residential revenue on the 3,366 is currently about 2.2 million. That'll increase to 2,556,000. That's a $314,000 increase in the revenues you receive from the commercial customers. So they would see a bill impact of 14%. Their EDUs will go up 14%, since they're charged on a per EDU basis.
Commercial.
Correct. Because you charge on a per EDU basis, their bills will go up 14%. Your rate per EDU has not changed, but their bills will see an increase. Okay. So because this needs to remain revenue neutral, you've got additional revenues on the commercial side, your rates per EDU can come down to remain revenue neutral. So I've included, just on the residential revenue side, total rate revenues are about 15 million. So as the commercial goes up, the residential can come down. Because there's a larger base of residential commercials, they'll see a bill impact of a reduction of about 2.5%. You remain revenue neutral in the district.
And it's easy to sell at 215 gallons a day, and we've got really good data for that.
That's what the data is telling us, and we'll continue to refine it over the next few weeks before we come back to you in March.
Because that's going to clearly be a question.
Exactly.
But what other communities in the rim have gone to this?
Well, the use of an EDU, the use of an EDU as the basic unit of service, wastewater service, so to speak, it was number one, so that's very common. I'd say the majority of the districts in Marin already use that. The key here is that, remember, an equivalent dwelling unit is a number that we pick. We choose what we think it should be. It's just meant to be a meaningful, uniform unit of service that we can then use for purposes of things like cost of service allocation. So some years ago, this organization settled on the definition of an EDU for Ross Valley as 250 gallons per day. And that was appropriate probably at the time, because they remember what the EDU actually is. It's simply taking the overall indoor winter season water use of our largest chunk of our customer base, which is single-family homes, and saying, what's the average? So it's a very simple number to begin with. It's not meant to be precise. It's meant to provide a convenient unit of measure for utility service. So my point is, it's a number we pick, as long as we can back it up. So if the district was not doing anything else with rates right now, what's important about what you have in front of you is, this is a minimum change that we see happening, because what we have found is the current definition of EDU is out of date, and thereby the cost allocation that occurs with it is out of date. And what you're seeing in front of you is that just by the hard math of fixing and updating the EDU to be more appropriate to today's average single-family residential water use, what Rick is showing you here is those are the sort of the baseline impacts of the minimum update that the district is looking at. I call it minimum because it's a given that we do what we can for equitable cost of service allocation. And if we have hard numbers that show there's an appropriate update to the EDU definition, and by extension that then rolls out slightly different allocations of the cost of service, this is what happens. So I think one way to look at this is everything else that Rick's going to talk to you about in the next couple of slides, this is a baseline to it. This is a minimum change that the district should be considering going forward, simply because the numbers show that it is an appropriate update to our allocation of costs between the customer classes. So I hope that's
We're making an objective of ratepayer equity. So currently, the residential side is picking up more of their burden of the costs than they should be, as witnessed by this recalculation of the EDU. This is realigning the ratepayer equity. Okay.
So it's gonna be winners and losers.
Absolutely, revenue neutral. There's winners and losers. In this instance, and that's why we've just said this right out front, it's easy to see. It's a commercial will increase, residential decrease.
Although it might be looked at that residential properties were subsidizing commercial properties. I mean, it's nobody wants to see, I mean, it looks like you're going to be increasing business expenses for businesses and you want to be business friendly. But I think the reality is residential properties have been subsidizing commercial properties. So, yeah, I don't think it's, nobody wants to see the rates go up, but this actually looks like it's the most equitable because basically it's the only one that's actually based on their usage.
Data.
On data and on their usage because they're on flow.
So I have a very practical question.
I'll try.
So I live alone with 4 bedrooms. I conserve everything I can. So will my rates go?
Well, we're not
They go
to
down
the end here.
2.5%.
I think it will be helpful.
They go down
No,
2.5%.
this is not.
Just this was done.
This is not the
Yeah.
complete picture.
It'll go up.
Yeah.
If this was all that was happening.
It's gotta come from
Yes,
somewhere
it will.
else, right?
It will go down.
If this is all that was happening.
It's the commercial rates that will go up, or what the commercial,
The 14.
yes.
And that's why we presented this kind of in a step process to show that there are different impacts of different changes that are contemplated being made.
And what about big apartment complexes?
Damn. They're the residential
They're
customers that,
still staying residential.
yes. So moving on, so pulling really up 3 different changes together, the key attributes of what you'll see on the next slide and the preliminary rate impacts that we're showing to give you an idea of the order of magnitude of what could be coming to you in March. The key attributes are first, redefining the EDU at the 215 gallons per day. In addition, we need to set rates for 14-15, so understanding the financial plan for 14-15, that is also consideration. And then the option 2 that I termed the rate structure, the flat rate differential. So all 3 of these aspects are baked into the next slide. And again, the multifamily differential, that rate factor, as alluded to earlier, is about 0.88, 88% of the single family rate. So we're contemplating a differential between the fixed fee for a single family dwelling unit and a multifamily dwelling unit.
Excuse me, could you tell us how you came up with that 88%?
Yes, that is based on the flows by customer type. So they're looking at the single family and the multifamily and understanding the differential, the average flow, because you could have 5 persons in a multifamily unit and 1 person in a single family unit. So it's the average flows. And that, I believe the data showed us about 70 to 80% was the reduction over single family to the multifamily. But the understanding that not all costs are fixed or variable costs. That would, just because you have 70% less flow doesn't mean you have 70% less cost. So understanding the components that are fixed related and variable related is this factor of 0.88%. And it's about a 60-40 split.
And you have data points that you do.
Absolutely. And we'll be working on refining those with more specific Ross Valley specific data, because some of this, as we're working through the process, we use industry data before we really dive into once we've got direction.
Why did the fixed cost bring that higher instead of lower? Why would multifamily, like clustered dwellings that share pipes? Like I've always looked at it where if you're willing to live on top of each other and you're all clustered and you're sharing pipes, that's less pipe in the street to be fixed. Like, if there is a 20-unit apartment building and it's sharing 50 feet of public pipe, those are 20 units sharing 50 feet of pipe. But a single-family house, 5 miles up a road has miles of pipe and.
And absolutely, it's averages. The multifamily complex may be 4 miles worth of pipe into the treatment center, and a single-family home may be 0.2 of a mile. So it is a law of averages of where this ends up. There's not only what goes to the main, but there's a shared responsibility to put the infrastructure in place to begin with. So that's the fixed component. Regardless how much flow goes through the pipes, those pipes needed to be built. So that's why it's a balance of the fixed versus the variable. And we'll have more detailed information on the study as we proceed with the process to let you know precisely where that point of aid came from. Because you're absolutely right. There's these nuances, how much effort you put in, how much time is available to do that, you have to balance that. So, taking those 3 key attributes, those changes from what you're currently doing, adding the new financial information for fiscal year 14-15, the definition of EDU, and also doing this differential between single-family and multifamily. We have some preliminary numbers here on this slide. Again, it's a little added complication. We have 2 rate zones in the district, both Ross Valley zone, as we termed it, and the Larkspur zone. And the reason for the differential, just a refresher, is the Ross Valley customers also contribute revenues not only to the rates that you set, but also through the ad valorem property taxes that come into the district that they are already paying. Therefore, the true cost is discounted because they are paying from another source. So it's not that they're paying less in total, it's coming from a different source. So all told, I separated this both in the blue, just stepping from keeping with the existing structure, if you didn't do this differential between single family and multifamily, what these impacts would be for the updated EDU and also for the updated financials for 14-15. And that's the blue set of numbers. And then going to this rate differential, you see the impact. So multifamily could see an 8% decrease in the Ross Valley zone and about a 2% decrease in Larkspur. And this isn't what we're recommending necessarily. This is just the results of where we are in the process. So we'll be happy to answer any questions.
So it's a 5-year rate structure. That's all it's going to go to at the end of 5 years.
What you're seeing here is because the rate structure is done in 1 year, and then from there, it will be the increase in the revenue requirement on an annual basis, uniform across the classes. Because once you change the structure, it would be, say, cost went up 10%, each rate would go up 10%. So this is the first year.
I have a question. We're
Yes.
not going to do a 5-year?
We will.
But the
But for
subsequent
rate
ones are all
structure
percentages.
discussions, the first
There's
year.
percentages, yeah, okay.
Correct. Because they will differ from the first year because you are changing within categories.
And then it's just going to be a flat percentage?
Correct. So we'll come back to you with 5 years worth of rates.
And we have talked about at the staff level of the team that the importance of doing what we can to smooth out this change, because that's a very important policy objective, which is the minimization of any abrupt changes for any particular rate class. So even though the hard numbers say this is what it should be, it is good policy, good practice to, within reason, to ask yourself how you could, in a sense, smooth this out. So, for example, you already saw from the updated definition of an EDU, if you did nothing but change that, it's going to result in a notable, certainly by many people's view, a significant change directly to the commercial customers. And you have to ask yourself, okay, do you really want to handle that abruptly, even though that is sort of, again, the minimal hard numbers, but you're doing a 5-year rate study here, and we do have some ability to say, hold, we can sort of smooth that out. We don't have to have that customer class take such a hard hit in year one. Now, we know they need to get to, over a couple of years, to this uniform point, but the main point I'm trying to make to you is that the numbers Rick is showing you this evening, number one, they're preliminary. There's some final refinements to a couple of cost of service items. And number two, the main thing that's missing at this point would be some of that essentially discretionary smoothing that we can do to say, let's not make this more painful than it needs to be. We don't like to see rate increases at all, but we don't have to make them unnecessarily abrupt for a particular customer class when we're trying to do this over a 5-year window. So, yeah.
If you just realize with math and data that certain people have been paying more than they should be, and they're subsidizing other people, you're not recommending to fix this immediately. You're recommending to do this over a 5-year period so it's less painful for the people that should be paying more?
Not exactly. No. The district, as you mentioned earlier, for some number of years, we make changes and then the system goes on for 5 years or longer, and things get out of balance. So we know that cost of service based on EDUs got out of balance, and as you pointed out earlier, for some period of time here, you could make the case that if you want to put it in terms of winners and losers, there was a particular customer class that was a quote winner, because based on these numbers, they seem to be getting a good deal. These are very high-level averages for the entire district, so that's something that's important to keep in mind. And it is appropriate in terms of rate-setting policy to say maybe it's not 5 years, but is there a 2 to 3 year transition that you can take these customer classes through, simply for the point that you're not trying to grab that dial and yank it around too dramatically. It's just it's good rate-setting policy practice. It's not perfect, to be sure, but it is considered good rate policy practice. So, the idea, to be clear, is to get to that equitable distribution that the new numbers tell us it should be, but get there in a manageable manner.
Well, along with Marina's question, though, the numbers that are in the green box here are actual, what we think is equitable. It's just not as big a rate increase as we could put in, and we're not putting in a big rate increase because of the shock approach, because we're just changing the EDUs around is going to create some shock value. So my take is that this final column is in fact equitable, that Marin's looking for, but that it's the subsequent increases that will bring the finances in line with what the actual demand's going to be to do the capital projects that we have going forward. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
I wish they used that methodology when my other taxes were raised, on my bill.
I tried.
I really wish.
In lieu of my taxes.
But I don't think it really addresses the equitable question. As Meg had brought up, she's a single, person in a house, and, we conserve, very much. And in this county, there are, the 1% of the nation is 10%. And there's a lot of homes that have more staff than that live in our house. And they're getting the free ride. And Meg and us, and we're subsidizing them. So I don't see the equity quotient here. And it's even in your presentation, in your chart on page 4, you give the ratepayer equity, you give this 2 stars, and a volumetric, you give 4 stars. So, I mean, I think it's a step in the right direction because you are giving multifamily dwelling, a break, a well-deserved break, but you're really not addressing and encouraging conservation.
So this year we experienced a drop in revenue from commercial. I believe, someplace I saw the numbers that because of the conservation that's taking place in commercial, our revenue was down. And do we have a projection for how much we're going to be off because of the conservation that's taking place? I saw some
I remember what you're referring to, Frank, yeah.
Talked about last meeting, I think.
Was it MMWG data?
Yeah.
Oh, Sonoma County. Did you do that?
No.
No, we've seen an actual,
All right,
we've
we've seen a drop in revenue from the commercial side.
Right here, this chart shows why that has happened. Now, this is residential usage, but assuming that the commercial usage kind of follows a similar pattern, you can see that the winter 2013 usage, which is what we used to bill this year.
Down 14%.
Exactly. So, yep, boom.
That means the revenue on the commercial side is going to be down 14% this year, by the way.
Yes. Now, it's a much smaller portion of our revenue. It's only 11% of our total revenue, but it is down. This volatility is why going to full volumetric at this point in time for this agency may not be the right balance in balancing all of the different objectives that we have. But moving to option 2 also doesn't prevent us from doing something else in the future. There's nothing that makes it difficult to move forward in the future.
because it is, sorry, can you go to the slide with the comparisons? Rick? So yeah, I mean, because this is a big part of when we did the rate study workshop, we of course had a whole discussion just on this topic. But the key point of that discussion was that we're having to balance a range of important policy considerations, not all of which, some of which are somewhat opposing. So it is a balance, and your earlier comment is correct, that if you were focused on nothing but the most pure theoretical distribution of cost, you'd want to be jumping straight to option 4 and going to that. We don't live in that theoretical world. We have to balance a range of considerations in our rate setting policy. We can move progressively and constructively in that direction, but when you balance all the considerations, this is achieving a good combination is what we're saying. So my main point is you're balancing a range of considerations, and that's why you're seeing the conclusions that you are. Because the points about, if everyone knows anecdotally, we could go on and on, the one lady who lives in a big house, the 5 family members that live in a 2-bedroom apartment, there is every combination of different situations in the community. And if that was your goal, was to address those to the umpteenth degree, that's where you'd want to be. And that might be a nice place to be for that purpose, but we are balancing a range: revenue stability, implementation, etc. So we're looking for a balance, is my point, I guess. Thanks, Rick.
A question. So MMWD is calling for a 25% voluntary reduction in usage. Should that go to mandatory 25%? How's that going to impact our rates? Only the commercial rates?
Correct.
So if commercial is 11% of our revenue, and we've lost 14% this year compared to last year.
Potentially, if it's in line with what you're seeing in the residential.
And if we had another 25% reduction, you're
It
talking
continues to
39% down in commercial?
Potentially, yes.
How do we make up that revenue?
You'll have to do it through rate increases.
Well, so Frank, that's a great example of what I was getting at. So when I talk about balance and incremental, if this district had already, just this past year, in 2013, you adopted some formal financial policies that help us move towards, well, to be specific, amongst other things, a rate stabilization fund reserve. And if we have that in place, which is considered good financial practice, one of its basic purposes would be to cushion us and give us a couple of years to respond to that kind of volatility. But where we are today, in early 2014, we're a couple of years away from having that rate stabilization reserve in place. We have it adopted as a target, and we have a financial projection that will move us towards it, but today we don't have it yet. So we're still vulnerable to just exactly what you're mentioning. If you were to make a what I'll call an overly ambitious step towards purely flow-based or more flow-based, you would be stepping right into that hazard, which is revenue volatility that you're not yet prepared to manage. We could potentially manage it a few years from now after we have that rate stabilization reserve. Right now, we don't. That's why I kind of describe this as incremental progress in the right direction.
So we got CMSA, and we paid them maybe half of the money for the capital for the building the plant, about half for treatment. Is that, that's good ballpark?
Round numbers.
Slightly less than half now.
Slightly less than half. Are we going to differentiate at all here the basic capital costs that we're paying CMSA, or is that going to start shrinking on us too? CMSA is going to want the same amount, the bond indebtedness that we're paying out of our revenue goes to CMSA.
Right.
But our revenue here is going to start dropping if in fact.
So the debt service
raising their rates.
the debt service we currently carry with CMSA, well, that we help support for CMSA. I think just for background, the original plant's paid off. The current debt was issued back in like 06, 07, I forget exactly. And it was for what's referred to as the wet weather flow program improvements. It was $65 million. We're all carrying that debt, meaning the JPA members and our customers. And per agreement, that debt service is currently allocated on an EDU basis, using the old definition of EDU. And for purposes of debt financing, I don't think no one's talking about changing that right now. The operations and maintenance side of CMSA, as you guys know, as of last year, they adopted a flow and strength-based allocation at a what I call macro level, meaning the three agencies get CMSA's O&M costs distributed to us based on actual flow and strength data combined at the plant. So just to be clear, the debt service we carry, that we help carry for CMSA, is by agreement allocated on an EDU basis, and will remain so until the JPA negotiates a change to that. And I'm not suggesting that's happening. That's what we pay. And their daily O&M, their annual O&M costs are allocated out between three agencies on a flow and strength basis.
Well, also, just to be clear, Frank, the current rate structure already exposes us to that volatility in the commercial customers, because it is a calculated EDU based on 250 gallons per day. The proposed rate structure, the recommendation from staff, that structure won't change that more than maybe, instead of being 11% of our total revenues, commercial might be like 12% or 13%. That's the move. So it doesn't significantly expose us to additional volatility in that area.
Say we adopt this, then this becomes the final proposal we adopt. Does it mean then for the first year we're going to go from 638 to, what is that,
703?
703?
On a single family.
Yes.
About a 10%.
Correct. Yeah, it says 10%.
Multifamily will drop down to 544, is it? Oh, it's hard to read this.
588, he's got it on the slide too.
Yeah, I'll get
It's
every
much easier.
So they're going to drop to 580.
How many people
It's
a type of residence. A single-family residence.
Is that an apartment building?
Duplex, triplex,
Oh.
apartment building, yeah. Single-family is a single-family home. Some of them may have a granny unit on the property. Some of them very well may be.
From an EDU standpoint, if we do this, the total number of EDUs that we have in our system will go up.
A little.
And don't we pay CMSA on our EDU and not a fixed
For the
amount?
debt service.
The debt service.
But it's a fixed amount.
Yeah, that's what I was alluding to, Peter. So until there's no one's suggesting that that changes, because, again, we took an EDU definition back when the bonds were issued, and we agreed to that allocation. The fact that this district is updating its definition of EDUs for the purposes of our rate study should not be confused with that issue.
We will run two calculations, one on the 215 and one on the 250, so that we can supply CMSA with what the 250 calculation is, which will keep us historically consistent with what we have been doing all along.
And that's per the debt payment agreement.
How I'm not positive that the debt payment agreement actually
Can we
defines
get-
the EDU.
Sorry.
One conversation. Sorry.
So the message is that it's not gonna, we're not defining ourselves into paying CMSA more.
One vote. And we don't know if San Rafael and Cordillera are in the process of updating their.
San Rafael just updated their rates. They just completed a 5-year rate study in late 2013. It's in place. They started
215.
They stuck to a largely flat, essentially a flat rate structure. They elected to not differentiate between multifamily and single family. So they left their rate structure entirely unchanged, which means it's identical to what we have now. And they adopted a series of 5-year adjustments that are in the roughly in the 6 to 8% range per year for the next 5 years.
Whoa.
That's what they just did in late 2013. So the CMSA member agencies are aware of the EDU discussion in terms of its need to be, quote, updated. But that, again, I think it's viewed as an individual agency issue right now for our own rate setting purposes. No one is, again, everyone's recognized it's not appropriate to extend that to the existing debt service agreement. That was locked in for its own reasons at the time, and I want to emphasize that's its own topic. This is just for our district. But I think it's important, for what it's worth to note, they're a very similar agency. They operate under very similar conditions to us, and the adjustments, the changes at a macro level that we're looking at over the next 5 years are by happenstance. I mean, they are almost identical to what San Rafael did back in late 13.
Except it's not necessarily full flat rate.
Correct. Sorry, Pat. They made no adjustments. Like we are recommending what we're calling a differential.
Right.
They elected not to do that. I happened to be at that board meeting. Their consultant reached a slightly different conclusion than our consultant, and recommended no change for that purpose. So.
Any other questions? I'm conscious of the hour. All right.
How's
Sorry,
the
take it off.
public holding up?
I think the public's been overly engaged. But any other questions from the public?
See, I can see the gears moving from Myra's glasses.
I have a question and a comment. Is it, I know it would be really hard, I think that you've done a fabulous job here, by the way, and I think you've really followed the data that every sewer district I've gone to shows that multifamilies are using about, 75 to 80% of winter water use. And that's just, and very clear that they're contributing less to the wastewater. So, and I think your readjustment of the EDU is brilliant. I think you had to bring it up to date. And I think it's fair for commercial, because commercial's on flow, and so the commercial makes sense. I think the multi-unit makes sense, because remember, you may have one apartment with one person and one apartment with 3 people, so the average kind of works out. And the only place you still haven't found equity is within Pam, you and I, people hardly using any water, living in houses. That's the only place where there is an equity yet. I think your commercial's good, your multi-family's good, but your single-family residence is still, like if I'm a single person here and there's 10 people in the house next door to me, that's the only place you haven't figured out how to have a fair, and so you have to just do. You'd have to bring flow into that question, because you could have 2 families. I mean, I know I'm a real estate agent. I'm in houses all the time. I sometimes see 3 families renting, a 5-bedroom house.
John did that study for us either last year or the year before.
Yeah, 2 years.
2 years ago. With the flow based on all the houses and everything like that. And it had wild fluctuations, number one, and it had things like 20 and 30% drops in revenue in 1 year, so that budgets went bankrupt. I mean, people,
Well,
the
that
district.
but I'm saying, I think your commercial's fair, your multi-families somewhat fair. I don't agree with the 88%. I think 80% would be fair. But I think your next phase is to look how to make it
Yeah.
fair for just single families. But is the answer flow?
Well, I think you kind of really summarized it well. You really, seriously, you did. I mean, because you're right. The next major step for this agency going forward, and I think this applies to really across the industry, because all these are all topics that apply to the other districts, as you guys know. That's sort of the next frontier for us. Is
But
what
so
do we do about
here's
that?
my question. I know, like, when we use less water, they charged us more per unit of water, and that's just, that's life, you know, it's economics 101. So here is my question. If you had a rate structure where you know you have to have your budget bringing in a certain amount of money, could you have a rate structure that said the rate will be X pennies per Y units of water if the total consumption is Z? But if the total consumption, you know, what water usage is Z minus T, then it's, you know, B cents.
Been done before.
I mean, and
Some
then your
triggers
budget,
that change the tiers.
it's just, you know, you're charging this amount if this amount is used, you know, this amount per cubic feet of water if the total usage is this. So that, wouldn't your budget be solved if you had a rate structure like that?
I mean, the question is, are you allowed to have a dynamic rate structure?
You can have a dynamic rate structure. You typically see that on the water side, just from the conservation.
Water, sea water, the CFU.
Yeah.
But they
some
do
triggers.
or pipeline a false, they reverse it though. Because their rate structures are usually
Right.
designed to promote conservation.
Right, to encourage conservation, absolutely.
I want
When you
to
use
throw
the
another
less
variable in there.
Yeah.
Myra, I
That's
appreciate your, she tutored my kids algebra in high
But
school.
it's just, you know, I'm tired of hearing people complain, I use less, I pay more. I mean, it's just, you know, if I have a pizza business and I only can sell 2 pizzas a day, they're gonna cost more than if I sell that, you know, slice of pizza in New York's $1, slice of pizza here is $5. Why? Because there's a lot more people in New York buying pizza. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm from New York. But could you have that rate structure? I mean, could you have a simple flow?
Theoretically,
Your
yes.
budget, but to Frank, your budget would be balanced. You would not have to worry about your budget if you knew, if you were totally on flow and you knew what you were going to charge per unit of water.
That would be just huge swings.
Yeah,
Huge
financially.
swings.
Yeah,
I mean, well, obviously, the new board next year can look at that if they'd like to.
No, total
It's an
flow, you're
idea
gonna
that
have
merits some
outliers
study
here
using some
and
real
here,
data
and you're
to
going to
see
have
what-
people that have
what
a
those
$2
parameters
bill
have to
and
be.
people that have
And
thousands of dollars of bills.
test the
Mill Valley,
volatility because
It is, you cannot,
They
you
did.
can't afford
Yeah,
it.
so Mill Valley's an example. They were all flow, but close to it or something.
I believe they were all flows.
Yeah, at first, their rates are like over 1,000.
Yeah, no, I worked with a district that was all flow, and it was really going nuts because it wasn't able now to pay for the infrastructure repair and
Didn't Mill
maintenance
Valley
costs.
recent?
Well, I think what they're doing is they are having a fixed, like, hookup fee and then 50% flow. I think they're having like a parcel fee.
Sure.
I think a lot of them have, like, if it was $700, it would be $350 for parcel and then the rest on flow.
You have a fixed component to maintain your system, and then a hybrid flow of
That's your
how much
typical
you
flow
use,
base.
yeah.
Right, yes.
Can we call the question? Or we can
Please,
actually do it
absolutely.
right now?
I'm just looking at the 3 agenda items that we've gotten to
I know,
tonight.
but-
The active agenda
I
items, I'm
have
thinking
one
we're setting a
quick
record.
question.
What's the
I have-
So
request
there's no action required, this is an informational
Well,
line.
yeah, we would, one more question, sorry.
Sure. On demographics, Mara has a good point on single versus multi. Do you take in the percentages of our district on how many single-family houses are opposed to how many multi-family?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so all that's, the variables of that are all calculated in that.
That's
Okay,
correct.
That's all I need to know.
All right, and then,
Sorry, what we did want is, I guess we would call it direction, or concurrence. Because the team would like to bring back to basically a fully developed proposal and the draft report, et cetera, in March. We don't want to carry forward all 4 alternatives, to be quite simple, because we think, and this is, I think, a good approach that other districts use. We want to get direction and lock down on that, kind of what I call that policy level question, which is the rate structure alternative, because it's really somewhat independent, or it's a precursor to what the detailed numbers look like. And so, from a practical kind of decision-making and progress perspective, we'd like to say, okay, what we're now doing is moving forward towards the final product, final proposed set of specific rate updates to you in about a month that are built around the flat rate differential alternative. So that's just, I want to be clear on that, because that is the recommendation of the executive team, that's for this period of the district's history, so to speak, and all the factors we are dealing with today in 2014, that is really quite far and away, in our assessment, the most appropriate structure change for the district to make. It doesn't close any doors. It doesn't prevent us from continuing progress towards the kinds of objectives that we talked about here tonight. So we do think it represents a sound balance, compromise, whatever word you want to use, of the different objectives we're trying to work with. So we, I don't know if you want to call it a vote or direction, but we would like to just not.
You want to do it by color, or do you want to do it by topic?
Is it the board's direction that you concur that it would be appropriate to take this further with what we're calling the flat rate differential rate structure?
If that's green, then that's,
That would be the green.
Yeah.
yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
There's not, I can't make that decision. I need more data.
Come back with more information,
No.
No.
What we're saying is this isn't, there's a what I call a qualitative decision really initially, which is the rate structure. The numbers, the detailed numbers will for that particular alternative is what will come next, and that's, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
There are 2 issues. One is to change to 215, and the second is to adopt the flat rate differential for the multifamily houses. So
Right.
those are the 2 issues that we need to decide tonight.
Well, no, let me
Well,
clarify.
the direction of these.
Right, the update of the definition of EDU to 250 gallons per day, I would characterize that as a technical issue. We're not asking for direction on that. It is what it is.
It is what it is, right.
It is what it is.
Sum it up the board.
It's good for you to be aware of it, Peter, but we want concurrence, but it's not really something we have a lot of.
it's more like a data input to this.
Yeah. And
It drives all kinds of things, so that's why I think it's probably.
it does. And we want you to be aware of it, because it is an important number, but it's sort of like saying our PG&E rates just went up 10.
So that makes it even simpler. So the simple question is, do we want to use the flat rate differential?
That's
Period. Okay, so what's the sense of the board?
I'm reading the agenda item, progress update on wastewater utility service rate study.
Yeah.
No staff.
So
Progress
so you-
update.
so you can read it.
Okay.
What does that mean we're gonna do?
Give direction on bringing that back, I would say.
That's what we're asking for, is that direction. Or I guess we've gotten enough comments, if we need we need to narrow it down and be working towards a final product at this point. And the approach that we had proposed and outlined, that's why we had to do public rate structure workshops, was to get us to this point in the decision-making process. We sought input from the public on 2 different workshops. This is kind of a step in the process. But I guess it's a direction or consensus. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, I guess I don't want to press it. Maybe the agenda item wasn't worded as best as it could have been, but we'd like to have a sense that that's the direction that we want to try and go.
So we held 2 meetings, and we had 2 in San Solo and 7 here, 9 people. 50,000 people live in this district, and 9 people have showed up and commented on what we're doing.
It's up to us, right? It leaves it up to us.
Right. So to try to understand, so I'm back on that. The single family for most of the Ross Valley will go up $65 a year, the first year. If that would be not correct. 638 to 703. I'm on page 5. So I'm 65. The RM multiples, that's like the second units and duplexes and all that stuff.
Residential.
That we know of.
It's the ones that are classified as multifamily on the tax roll.
On the tax roll, okay. They're going to go down $50.
These are the preliminary numbers. I guess I want to emphasize that.
Okay.
We want to bring you back a refined set that has these smoothed out as best we can get them. So that, again, back to the thing of trying to minimize the abruptness of the shifts for any particular rate class. So, for example,
Well, let me just finish up there.
Go ahead.
I mean, look at Larkspur. So Larkspur, a single family home will go up $100, $864, $964, and the multiple family in Larkspur will go down $15. Am I reading that correctly for the first year? So is this based on is this based on just trying to break even, or the revenue needed for next fiscal year?
It's based on the
Needs
5-year financial forecast that was presented to the board in October.
but the specifics in the table you see in front of you reflect the 14-15 financial year.
Okay, so when I look at the previous study we had, the other one, I see CMSA's projected treatment costs and debt service. Are we going to have that in this next?
Yes.
The whole, it's going to be just like this?
It was in that financial forecast, so it will be in this.
In the draft report that accompanies the recommendation, this is looking for direction on the structure at the moment, not the specific rate impacts.
You know, like, you can't really control what they're doing down there at CMSA, right?
Right, I just want to have the numbers. So we're talking about board presentation of revised financial plan and rate structure, board authorized mailing notices to ratepayers, protest period, protest due, board adopts rates in 5-year absent majority protest. So, but we're only looking at 1 year.
What you saw tonight was just 1 year, correct?
But we can project out 5 with this.
I think what is a fair representation for this presentation tonight is that any of the actual numbers, as far as whether it's 88% or 89% or 85%, the multifamily to single-family differential, whether it's $700 or $800 or $900 per EDU, those are all preliminary estimates to give you an idea of the ballpark that we're in for this first year. Only to illustrate the effects of the structure, not to say, I agree we should charge X dollars.
Yeah, that makes a way to it, yeah.
So is there consensus?
Well, I guess I'm having trouble with it because there's nothing to compare this to. You know, I know Greg just said, well, you're doing it here and there, but I guess I have some concern about, and, you know, being on the finance committee and projecting out or what's been successful and what hasn't.
Well, again,
You know what I'm saying?
the trade-offs between the rate structure alternatives are not, at a macro level for the entire district, when you're talking about our 5-year financials, they're neutral. The reason I say they're neutral is because no matter what rate structure we pick, we know what the overall financial outcome it is that we're trying to achieve. So I guess what we're trying to emphasize is that the rate structure decision is a policy level sort of qualitative discussion that then helps govern the details of the numbers. So when we say, yeah, we're asking you for direction where we don't have detailed numbers for every one of these, it's because it's actually not appropriate to try and evaluate and pick one of these strictly on the resulting numbers. You're starting with it from a policy perspective, based on rate equity, et cetera, this looks appropriate for the district. And to be clear, what we're suggesting is a very modest incremental shift in our rate structure. It's not revolutionary. It's very modest. It's very defendable. It's very explainable. So I don't want you to feel like, the rate structure recommendation you're getting this evening is not. It's fairly minimal. We're updating the EDU definition, which again is sort of just flat out required just for good business practices, and we're recommending a very modest incremental shift towards this differential rate application, where to help capture what we can clearly identify about the difference in cost of service between multifamily and single family. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the direction we're asking for, unless you've got some burning policy reason why you
I
think
want it perfect.
Okay.
You're basically, he's asking to move us, he's asking us to select this one and say yes. So we're
Right,
happy
but
that we're moving one step to the right.
Yeah.
And
But it doesn't, it's got 2 for the ratepayer equity, and
Well, we talked about that earlier, Pam. It's a balance.
right. So I guess I'm not hearing that what happens if we can't give you clear direction on this? Does everything grind to a halt?
No, we would.
Because
we would try to. I think, unless you tell us not to, we'll bring you back a fully developed proposal and a draft technical report and a 5-year set of detailed rates with some smoothing.
And is that what you're being asked to do at the end of the table, Pam?
Well, that's what we will go do, because that's the scope that we've agreed to, and that's the direction that has been set. We're out to do a rate study. That's where we're headed.
this is the same one you gave to the public?
No, what you have today is a presentation just for this discussion. The full public discussion was like 30-something slides. It was much longer. All about structure, no numbers.
Yes, it was, and it was very thorough. But Pam, what I'm trying to figure out is what are we going to need to deliver to you?
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm serious now.
I'm just a little nervous on the ratepayer,
Pardon me?
It's just the, I just want to make sure that we're not just focused on pure revenue.
What
And
about
we're making
per
sure
capita
we're covering the
project?
ratepayer.
That's what a rate study is.
Actually,
We're making a significant incremental step towards improved equity by applying this updated, or not updated, by applying this new flat rate differential. That's the 0.88 that we were discussing earlier. So the stars, that chart's meant to be kind of overall comparison. I think it's entirely accurate to say that the recommended rate structure alternative is a significant step forward towards improved cost of service equity out in the allocation. It's not perfect, but that's why we're emphasizing it's a balance. If you go up and down Marin County, look what all the other wastewater utilities are doing, this change would basically put us, again, sort of smack in the middle of the pack. It's a modest change, I guess is what I'm saying. It's not.
You know what I'm thinking, and I hate to say this, but it sounds like the group needs to hear the full 30-slide presentation.
yeah, Pat, you're reading my mind.
I sent that to the board a couple weeks ago prior to the.
I know,
I know,
you
but
know,
John-
when someone receives a
no
hard copy
offense.
PowerPoint or
We've been
an
through
electronic copy,
Yeah,
it may not have the same impact as a full presentation. So
sure.
having sat in on what you did, what was it, last
Wednesday.
Tuesday, Thursday?
Yeah, last one.
I mean, it sold the program for me. Now, I might impede on everyone and say, hey, can we maybe have an evening where people can come and see the presentation again, including board members who haven't been in attendance. I know I don't need to be there, and I won't help to create a quorum, but then you can see exactly what Greg's showing about as far as where we lie in the pack with like
That would be
agencies.
very helpful for me. I would
But
feel
but
much
Greg,
better.
what I don't want to do is digress either. And I don't know if I don't mean to put people who already know this where we are
But
with
it is so crystal clear that this is an improvement over what we're doing already, and something that we have to do.
I don't want to intentionally delay the process, but I want to, we haven't always agreed on these things, so.
Well, for myself, I went online, I was gonna print it, it was like 33 pages. I didn't print 33 pages, but I read most of them. And so then I ran some tapes and calculated out the 5-year projections for Larkspur and for the rest of the Rock Valley. So I thought that's what we're gonna be talking about tonight, but we're not talking about that.
That would be next month,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
So you still have critter tape.
Absolutely.
We're by the rules of
So there's not consensus to give direction that we are interested, that we are able to move to this.
Well, my consensus is yes, but do you want to,
So,
we
would
can
you
ask
like
you
us
for
to
the
take a
5?
No, we can't take a vote. I mean, we have, because it's not agendized that way, is that
Yeah,
true?
just give consensus or direction what you want to bring back, so, or you can take a vote, but it's not set up that way.
My sense is the process should continue.
Okay.
I'm just withholding my judgment to see more of it.
Would be.
What about a Saturday workshop to do
Um,
this presentation? That's what a lot of the communities are doing these days, is Saturday mornings.
By all means, we can go through the rate structure workshop presentation that we gave. Happy to do that. I'll leave it, however you guys want to structure that. If you want to do it as a board, we can do that. If you want to, some of you, if some of you are okay with the direction and we want to meet, whatever, sort of informally, individually, that's fine too. I think we do it up to your direction on that. I can tell you what it's worth, that entire presentation leads to the conclusion that this is the appropriate rate structure alternative for the district. It is a lot of information, and if it's helpful to go through it separately, let's do what it takes. It's an important decision.
Can I ask a question? Wendy, is it okay? Can you go back to that before, I'm kind of sad about this because what's happening right now, because if you look at number 1, that's where we are right now. And it has the least equity. See that one store? And I'm really nervous you're not going to take a step forward and you're just going to stay there. So one jump into the future is 2 stores with equity, which is more fair. Now, if you want to get really more fair to everybody, you've got to go to number 4. But the reality is that this district is not able to do that right now. So it seems very simple to me that you want to do 3 steps, but you're not capable of doing it. So at least do 1 baby step.
It does seem simple, doesn't it? We tried.
I just thought it was simple.
That's very nice of you.
I want all 3s on 3.
And now, is that because you're a single-family home owner, or?
No, I just really.
Because I'm a single-family
I'm
home owner
just
too, and
When we put those stars on there, let me clarify something. The team said, should that be 3 or 4? No, it should be 3. No, it should be 4. My point is, those stars are very relative. They're just rough indicators. That's all they are. They're like pluses and minuses and zeros. So they're a general indication of their pros and cons to those things, that they're not, I'm not gonna pretend they're more specific than they are, they're not. We, you know, Rick and John and Wendy and I looked at those and went, yeah, this is about 4, this is about 2, it's about 3. We argued about it for a few minutes. The trade-offs are very apparent, so they're
You're
just
not-
an indicator.
But you've got to go to 4 for equity with
Yes.
single-family homes.
Yes.
The 3 stars is only, I'm a single-family homeowner in North Valley. And the 3 stars only help multifamilies. You've got to go to the 4 stars to help single families, which you guys are not doing in the next 3 months. So you could, the only thing the most, you could do the 1 jump, maybe you could do the 2 jumps, but you can't do the 3 jumps, and therefore you can't make it more equitable for single families right now. But you could move in that direction.
What I'm hearing is that none of us on the board wants to impede the process. So I would say let the process continue, and I propose that staff, emails information about a potential Saturday workshop for board members and/or community members between now and whenever you think you can get it done. I actually think that's a great idea. I think having a Saturday workshop would be a good idea. I think you would get a lot more community participation.
So what we'll want to do is have that happen as soon as we reasonably can. So just to ask, what's the board's earliest availability for this will be a special board meeting. It'll all be posted appropriately and so forth. And the only topic on the agenda is the presentation and discussion of the rate structure alternatives presentation.
Is it a board meeting or is it
Be a board meeting.
going to be a public?
Depends on how many people.
Well, how many are you going to be there?
I'm
Right.
not coming.
What's the purpose of it?
I understand it to be
So
to get a
can I understand?
presentation of the same presentation that we gave to the 2 public workshops.
So I would propose it be a public workshop that we promise no more than 2 of us would attend. Is that acceptable?
To me,
I've seen it and I support it, so I don't think, I now support other board members being able to enjoy that presentation as I did.
And that's totally appropriate. I guess I misunderstood it. Whether it's a workshop or board meeting, of course, is all dependent on whether there's a quorum. And if you're not expecting a quorum, then by all means, that obviously simplifies the scheduling as well. We can simply figure out who wants to be there and we can.
But I think it wouldn't be a quorum just to attend a presentation.
If there's 3 of you in the room, it has to be a board meeting.
No, it has to be a special, or it has to be noticed if there's a quorum.
That's all. The label's not so important, I think. What is it you'd like to be getting back?
We'll promise a non-quorum.
Okay.
All right, is that acceptable to you? Yeah, we'll promise a non-quorum.
Okay, so there'll be no more
Which is
than
to say,
2
exactly.
board members. Okay, so let me ask you this, I'm sorry, if there's 2 board members, can we go ahead and, do we have a rough idea when we want to do this? Do we want to do it?
Weekend of April 21st.
No, it's too late. It has to be done now.
We can do it,
I don't have anything planned for any Saturday morning.
So
okay? Is there some reason we're focused on Saturday?
Because Pam can do it.
Then the public can come at any time of the
I couldn't go to either
day,
one
I
of these
think.
meetings. I was
Okay.
working one day and I had an evening thing, and I couldn't go to those 2 meetings,
Okay.
so
I thought you were worried about maybe the public would want to listen and they're off on Saturday.
I've just been to certain public meetings on Saturday, charrettes and what have you, and a lot of people go and they can't go. They bring their kids.
Where would
home.
this thing be held?
Yeah.
We'll have to find a venue, it can be,
The school.
be either similar to what we've done already. The short answer is we'll find a venue,
We're going to add to the paper.
which was,
That's some money on it, so, 2 people and 7 people, 9 people, 50,000.
We also sent press releases, it was,
yeah, we did do a fair amount of advertising and so forth.
We can just say this is the last workshop. that we
Okay.
attend.
Okay.
You know what, we
Yeah,
can-
yeah, I remember we were gonna do that, right? She mentioned.
I just want to be clear with the purposes. I'm understanding it's because at least 2 board members would like to have an opportunity to really delve into the rate structure workshop presentation.
And I think, another public meeting, this is going to affect rates.
not a problem. It's up to you guys entirely. As I said, I will simply make the point, yeah.
I'd rather do evening meetings myself.
I'll do an evening meeting this evening.
Saturday evening?
What we care about is accommodating our.
But what are we gonna learn? What are we gonna learn that I didn't learn after reading that 33 pages?
You're gonna see a 30, roughly a 30-slide presentation making the case in a sense.
I'm gonna go in a completely different direction than that 33 pages showing.
No, sorry, two separate presentations. I'm referring to the one we gave in the two public workshops.
Oh, okay.
That's the one that is, it has no numbers. It's strictly about what goes into rate structure, policy setting, and how we arrived at our recommendation for the differential rate. Okay.
Or is this a complete waste of time?
I think it's gonna be a waste of time, actually.
Is
All
it
right,
already
so are we
kinda have a
comfortable with
direction
moving the
you wanna go with?
process forward? Or
Yes,
is that
let's
the
go
choice?
with it.
Okay.
No, I'm not saying, I'm not picking it to be, I'm not picking anything. I just wanna continue the
Understood.
process.
Okay.
Next step says we're gonna meet in
March.
March.
Okay. All right, and what we'll be bringing you in March, to be clear, because I don't want there to be any mis-expectations, is we'll be bringing you a fairly fully developed, with the 5-year detailed rates and a draft report from HFH. It will be a fully public net meeting, et cetera, and it will be a completely developed set of rate proposals with smoothing, et cetera, all the final numbers for your consideration. Okay.
Great.
Okay. Very good.
We have
Can we move them to the next
three other
meeting?
agenda items.
For the next meeting.
Are we able, are there any,
They're all strict.
would we table them? There's nothing.
The only one that is time sensitive is
Low rate study,
the Mira.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm sorry, the only one that's rate sensitive, or pardon me, time sensitive, because it's a contractual issue, is item 14. It's really quite straightforward, but I'll take your guys' direction on it.
so we want to be able to utilize what's remaining wet season needs. We've not had enough rain, but we've had some good rains, and we want to be able to build more data off of what's remaining in the wet.
So then we back up, do you guys want to jump to item 14?
So we're tabling, is it agreed that we'll table items 12 and 13?
Continue the next meeting.
Continue to next meeting,
Okay,
yes.
very good, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so I will introduce this. It's very, again, quite straightforward. We are in the middle of the flow study. All of the flow monitoring equipment has been out since the first of the year. Everything's been functioning really well. I'll just say, actually, it's pretty amazing stuff. All 20 stations are working. They actually have wireless transmitters where during the last big storm cycle, I could log on from home and see what the system was doing 6 hours earlier. It was quite interesting. The problem we ran into, as luck would have it, of course, is as soon as we decided to do a flow study, the whole state got hit by a drought. And we have been waiting for adequately strong storm systems to generate the flows. We got fairly substantial flows. Obviously, that was by any measure, a huge storm, over 12 inches of rain in a lot of places over the 3 days. But because the ground was so unusually dry, and other places saw this as well, it still managed to sop up an awful lot of that rain. So we saw about a 9-fold increase in our wet weather flows over base, which is obviously significant, but it's still, we peaked at around 36, 37 MGD, and we simply are...
For
12 to 55, yeah.
Right. So this is really just making sure that, given what we've already invested and completed on the flow monitoring study, that we don't stop short of getting the best information that we can. The information from the flow monitoring is going to help us make decisions about some very big ticket items in the future. And so my way of looking at these, and I think I'll just throw it out there, is that we're making a modest adjustment here to make sure we have the best information for decisions down the road that are gonna be worth millions of dollars.
Give us quality data.
Right, so that's all this is about. It's a 1-month extension of the flow monitoring program, so that the equipment can be left in place, because if we do demobilize and have to come back, we're gonna eat those costs. So that's all this is. I don't wanna minimize it, it's a $33,349. The monies, we do have the amount to cover it. And if approved, we would do a simple contract amendment with the SGOs to extend this by 30 days. That's all.
Is there any chance that this rain is gonna make it?
There is.
It's gonna help, it's gonna help. But it's gonna go into March, and the contract ends at the end of
We need this data.
The timing is awkward, but if by Wednesday, and it also takes 3 or 4 days to post-process the data. So if we're lucky, we have a pretty tremendous storm over the next few days. By Wednesday or Thursday of next week, we may know that we've got some good information. The timing is just difficult. The recommendation is to just let it run for the 30 days.
The whole month of March.
We'll have a solid.
We may get 2 or 3 storms turned around.
Yeah.
Oh, by the weather people talking.
We'll have a very solid
Well,
set
that's
of,
not the issue.
we'll have a very solid flow set at that point. So the flow, remember, the flow study is something we do maybe once every 5 to 10 years.
We've been talking about it forever.
Yeah, so this is a,
Yeah, last time we did it was before the last, well, the complemented capacity assurance plan.
yeah.
All right.
26.
Questions, board members?
I'm totally in favor of this.
How much was the original contract?
149.
Yeah, it was, the original contract was 149,088.
There it is, okay.
Yeah.
And this is E2 stuff, right? Is this-
So we're gonna take it to 183.
Right, right. It's E2's equipment,
Yes.
Paid 183, 437.
the ones I'm always worried about.
Yeah,
You
but
want
then
to
we're
put
gonna do
other
that.
questions
Okay.
out to the public?
I don't think we have a choice on this, right?
Out to the public?
Okay.
Bring it back to the board? Do I have a motion?
I move that we authorize Amendment 1 to the contract between the district and West Coast for an additional $34,349.00.
I'll second that.
Roscoe, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Tabling, continuing everything else to the next meeting, including general manager report, and so on, et cetera. Thank you all.